The sun hung low in the sky over the reach, illuminating rolling fields of sunlit green and gilded wheat that stretched as far as the eye could see. A hush lay across the land, though in Highgarden itself, the bustle of servants and guards told of myriad goings-on beneath the stately facade. Within the grand castle, the seat of House Tyrell for uncounted generations, the air simmered with quiet readiness. Word from the north had arrived that very morning, discreet but urgent, and so the Lady Olenna Tyrell had summoned her most trusted aides to a council behind closed doors. Flowers adorned every corridor of Highgarden, the sweet fragrance clinging to the stone like perfume, for the Tyrells prided themselves on their elegance and bounty. But there was an edge to that sweetness now, for the times demanded practicality over display. Olenna Tyrell, known throughout the Seven Kingdoms as the Queen of Thorns, sat in her favorite cushioned chair in a spacious chamber that overlooked the Mander. She was as shrewd as she was proud, and she did not suffer fools easily or at all. The room was quiet but for the swishing of skirts and the rustle of parchment. Olenna's hawkish eyes flicked between her advisors. Beside her stood a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a grave expression. Garth Bannister, an old friend of the family and rumored spymaster within House Tyrell's more clandestine circles. Across from him, by the table, fidgeted Maester Oliver, a wiry young man still new to Highgarden's intricacies. On a nearby padded bench perched Lady Leonette Fossaway, a cousin by marriage, quietly biting her lip and watching Olenna with keen intensity. "I have a letter from Riverrun," Olenna declared, her voice low but cutting. "I assume you all know what it contains." Leonette shifted, smoothing out the fabric of her gown. "Robb Stark," she began. "The king in the north. He extends a proposition." "A request," Olenna snapped. "He may style it however he wishes, but it's a request for an alliance. He would have us turn our back on the Iron Throne as it stands, or so it seems." "Your ladyship," Garth said in a measured tone. "We have had, if I may be frank, no love lost for the current occupant of the Iron Throne. Joffrey Baratheon is king in name but a Lannister in truth, and the Lannisters have not shown House Tyrell the respect we deserve after all we did to seat them there. They do not seem grateful for our wheat and gold." Olenna scoffed. "Indeed, they do not. We have fed King's Landing for generations, but we are expected to bend the knee without any semblance of courtesy or negotiation. Still, an overt alliance with Robb Stark, would that not be seen as treason by King's Landing?" Leonette lifted her head. "Treason, yes, but what if it succeeds?" Silence followed, thick with implication. Olenna, always quick to read subtext, gave a small, tight smile. Her eyes narrowed. "Success depends on more than just a hope and a prayer," she said. "We must gauge the North's strength. Robb Stark's victories against the Lannisters so far are impressive, but the realm is huge and fraught with uncertainties. Then there's the matter of the Riverlands and the Tyrells' own interests, to say nothing of the Crown's reaction if they suspect what we plan." Garth nodded, folding his arms. "We might exploit their complacency. The Lannisters think of themselves as untouchable. Their gold out of the Westerlands has long maintained their power, but even Casterly Rock cannot buy absolute loyalty. The realm's mood is precarious. The small folk whisper that King Joffrey is a monster, that the realm deserves a better ruler. If we strike at King's Landing not with swords blazing, but with cunning and diplomacy, we might seize the city without the devastation of open war. And that," Olenna mused, "is precisely what Robb Stark's letter proposes. The North will pressure the Crown's forces in the field, keep Tywin and his armies preoccupied. Meanwhile, we slip into King's Landing, starve out the city, or better yet, suborn the key figures from inside. The Master of Whisperers, the King's Guard, the merchants who feed the capital. The city might be ours by cunning alone." Maester Oliver cleared his throat. "But my lady, you must remember that the capital is complicated. Peter Baelish, Varys, and Cersei Lannister's wiles are not to be underestimated." Olenna leaned forward. "Then it's a good thing I'm not easily cowed by the likes of them. If we want to do this, and that's still an if, we do it carefully. We do it quickly, and we do it decisively." She pursed her lips and tapped her cane against the floor. We need answers. Answers and readiness. Prepare our best envoys. Keep it out of Marjorie's ears for now. I don't want my granddaughter entangled in this until I'm certain of the path. I'll pen a response to Robb Stark. Now leave me. Except you, Garth. The others bowed and took their leave, though Leonette paused for a moment as if to say something more before an impatient wave from Olenna sent her out. When the door clicked shut, the Lady of Highgarden turned her shrewd gaze on Garth. The sunlight from the chamber's balcony cast shadows across her lined face, emphasizing the steel behind her eyes. So, old friend, Olenna said softly, shall we commit treason? Garth's smile was a faint, grim thing. We are only traitors if we lose, my lady. At Riverrun, the banners of the direwolf flew proudly beside the sigils of House Tully. The waters of the Red Fork glinted in the midday sun. In the great hall, Robb Stark paced with restless energy. Despite the presence of lords and loyal bannermen, Edmure Tully, the Great John, Roose Bolton, his trusted mother Catelyn, he found his heart racing in anticipation. A message had come from Highgarden bearing the Tyrell rose, sealed with Lady Olenna's distinct crest. Catelyn watched her son closely. She saw in him both the boy who once chased cats through the halls of Winterfell and the hardened king who had won victories against Tywin Lannister. Now he stood poised for the next maneuver, which could mean the difference between forging a stable realm or dooming all they had fought for. King Robb, she said gently, using his title in front of the others. Remember that alliances in the south are not easily maintained. The Tyrells once supported Renly Baratheon before accepting a match with Joffrey. They are pragmatic folk. Robb turned the sealed parchment over in his hands. I know, but we need allies if we're to have any chance to end this war without losing half the North's strength. I'm tired of hearing my men whisper about distant battles. The men say we can't take King's Landing by simple force. It's too well defended, too costly in blood. If the Tyrells can open a path into the city, or better still, turn the capital from within, we could end this war more quickly. Edmure Tully stepped forward. My nephew, what if Olenna Tyrell's price is too high? She might demand all manner of concessions. Highgarden is powerful. They might want half the spoils. Robb's blue eyes flicked toward his uncle. We'll grant them what we must, within reason. The North is strong, but we're too far from King's Landing to supply a prolonged siege effectively. Even with the Riverlands behind us, we would be bogged down. But if the Tyrells ensure that the city's gates open, or that we can take it without thousands of deaths, it might be worth almost any price. Catelyn pressed her lips together, worry etched on her features. I just pray this alliance leads to a swift resolution, she said, her voice quieter. For Sansa's sake and Arya's and all our people. Robb, hearing the names of his sisters, felt the old ache in his chest. Sansa was in King's Landing, or so he last knew, betrothed or at least promised to that boy King Joffrey. Arya missing entirely. If there was a chance, any chance, to free them, we will see what they demand, he replied, at last breaking the seal and unfolding the parchment. The letter was written in a neat, measured hand, though the words were so sharp Robb could almost feel Lady Olenna's biting tone through them. It spoke of House Tyrell's desire to see an end to the madness that grips the crown, and how there might be an opportunity to resolve disputes with minimal bloodshed. Subtle hints peppered each line about the Tyrells' readiness to reconsider alliances, should the correct approach and courtesy be shown. Finally, it demanded that Robb Stark, or a trusted emissary, make his way to Highgarden for discussions. It ended with a succinct flourish. We look forward to the North's courtesy. Robb exhaled, the tension easing from his shoulders somewhat. It's an invitation, he said, handing the letter to Catelyn, which means they're serious. My lord, Roose Bolton said, quietly stepping forward. I must warn that traveling to Highgarden is dangerous. You are valuable, and there are many who might prefer your head on a pike before you can forge such an alliance. I'll send an envoy then, Robb decided, but I want to go myself. I don't trust an alliance brokered by lesser lords. The Tyrells are shrewd, and they'll want to see my resolve firsthand. If I want them to trust me, I must show I trust them. There was a murmur of concern among the gathering. Catelyn found herself torn. She knew the importance of forging alliances face to face, but risking the king in the north so far from home base was no small matter. At last, she nodded. Then we will plan the journey carefully. We cannot have you ride into a trap. Robb inclined his head in appreciation. We ride discreetly. I'll keep a small retinue, only those I can trust with my life. Grey Wind included. A stir of disapproval came from Lord Bolton, but it was outweighed by the Greyjohn's hearty grin. Your wolf will keep you safe. Anyone tries to lay a finger on you, and they'll have their arm torn off. Catelyn glanced over the letter one last time. You'd best respond quickly, my son. The realm won't wait. Robb's jaw tightened. Then let it begin. Highgarden's gardens were the stuff of legend, and Robb Stark, having never ventured so far south before, found himself unprepared for their sheer splendor. Exotic blooms, carefully nurtured vines, and marble statues lined the manicured paths. Aromas of citrus, lavender, and rose mingled in the gentle breeze from the Mander. It was a world away from the snows and towering pines of the north, and though the warmth was pleasant, Robb could not forget the seriousness of his presence here. He and his chosen companions, Grey Wind padding by his side, Catelyn riding behind him, and a handful of loyal men, had arrived at Highgarden's gates at sunset the evening before. In typical Tyrell fashion, the welcome had been polite, courteous, and brimming with underlying tension. Now, led by a pair of dignified guards in gilded half-armor, Robb made his way to a secluded courtyard where Lady Olenna wished to speak. The hush in the corridors reminded him of a predator's lair, yet the corners were filled with greenery, with bursts of color and sweet fragrance. He suspected that behind every flower lay a hidden thorn. His eyes flicked over a group of ladies-in-waiting who curtsied demurely. He did not see Margaery Tyrell. Rumor said she still lingered in the capital, betrothed to Joffrey, but who truly knew the path the Tyrells wove? He entered a courtyard bounded on three sides by ivy-laced walls. The open side overlooked a gentle slope that descended into lush gardens. A table and chairs had been set, replete with small plates of fruit, cheese, and freshly baked bread. Olenna Tyrell was already seated in one of the chairs, leaning on her cane. At her side stood Garth Bannister, stoic and tall, a silent sentinel. Robb approached, offering a respectful bow. Grey Wind hung back at a subtle command. Catelyn inclined her head to Olenna in greeting. The old woman's keen gaze swept over them both with unmasked curiosity. The king in the north, Olenna said wryly. I was wondering if you'd come yourself or send one of your flinty bannermen. Robb eased into the chair opposite her and folded his hands on the table. My lady, I thank you for hosting us. We come in good faith. How splendid, she said, her tone dry. And Catelyn Tully Stark, of course. I remember your mother, Manisa, though not well. Welcome to Highgarden. Catelyn remained standing a moment longer before taking the seat next to her son. Lady Olenna, it is a pleasure to see the famed gardens of your house. Yes, they're delightful, aren't they? Especially when not littered with meddling Lannisters. Olenna turned her penetrating stare upon Robb. Let's not mince words, boy, no. I suppose I should call you Your Grace. But you must excuse an old woman her bluntness. We have some business, you and I. Let us speak plainly, Robb agreed. We know that House Tyrell's position at King's Landing has grown tenuous. The Lannisters have taken you for granted. You feed their city, you secure their alliances, yet they repay you with disdain and suspicion. It is no secret the realm grows weary of King Joffrey. Olenna nodded, pressing her lips together. True enough, the boy is a terror. My sweet granddaughter Margaery has had the misfortune of being thrown into a pit of vipers. Imagine wedding that abomination. But you see, the Tyrells are no fools. We cannot simply cut ties with the Iron Throne on a whim. Not unless there is a better arrangement on the table. Robb locked eyes with her, determined. I propose we arrange something far more beneficial for both our houses. Our combined might could bring King's Landing to heel without incurring the vast casualties of an open siege. You have influence in the city. If we coordinate from within and from without, we might force a surrender. Afterward, we could ensure that the Iron Throne is held by someone who will treat the North and the Reach with respect. Olenna's mouth curved in a tiny, cunning smile. Ambitious words, young Stark. But the Lannisters have gold. They have Tywin's cunning and men in the field. They hold the Queen Mother, the Boy King, half the court. Cersei has claws, and the old lion's not easily bested. What, pray tell, do you offer to House Tyrell as incentive for risking everything? Catelyn placed a hand on the table. We know your resources are vast, my lady, but wars are costly. We can offer the full might of Northern Bannermen to ensure security for the Reach once King's Landing is taken. We can offer trade agreements, grain from the Reach, furs from the North. Joint guardianship in effect. And if we succeed, we would restore order to the realm. No more monstrous boy kings or humiliations for House Tyrell. Olenna chuckled softly, leaning on her cane. All very diplomatic. Yes, indeed, your so-called king in the north would hold dominion over a swath of land that the crown traditionally claims. Is that it? You'd break away or set yourself upon the throne. Robb took a breath. I have no desire to sit the Iron Throne. My father. He hesitated. A flash of grief for Ned Stark crossing his heart. He served as hand of the king out of duty, not ambition. The North wants to protect our people. We want our independence recognized, or at least to hold the crown accountable. I do not wish to claim the entire realm. A faint twinkle entered Olenna's eyes. Refreshing that. You do realize such an arrangement would require the realm to accept a new distribution of power. It's not as simple as capturing the city. The throne can't remain empty. Robb hadn't missed that subtle question. Who would sit the throne once Joffrey was deposed? Catelyn's posture stiffened beside him, her eyes flicking between Olenna and her son. We could see someone with a just claim take the seat, Robb said carefully. Someone not beholden to Lannister gold or cruelty. Stannis Baratheon has a claim, though he is said to be stern. There's also talk of Tommen or Myrcella, children with at least Baratheon name, but they too carry Lannister blood. And who knows if they're truly Robert's get. The realm might not accept them easily. Olenna tapped the table. Indeed, the line of succession has become a tangled mess. But let us not get ahead of ourselves. First, we remove the Lannisters from power, gently if possible, and then we see who emerges to claim the throne. Perhaps the Seven will guide us. Her tone suggested that she trusted the Seven about as much as she trusted the Lannisters. Robb recognized a kindred cynic. Then let's speak of how. If we coordinate, your people could hamper King's Landing's supply lines. They're reliant on your grains. My armies, along with the River Lords, will hold Tywin's host at bay. If Tyrell informants can undermine the city from within, sabotage guard posts, turn the gold cloaks, we may not even need to storm the gates. Olenna studied him for a long moment, silent but for the faint breeze stirring the garden's flowers. And if we do, how do we keep the realm from devolving into further chaos? The moment news spreads that the capital has fallen, every ambitious house might swoop in. We move swiftly, Robb said firmly. We secure King's Landing, free the political hostages, and remove the Lannisters' figureheads. We establish control of the major offices, Lord Commander of the City Watch, the Master of Coin, of Laws, of Whisperers. We keep the council intact but under new leadership. Then we seek the realm's acceptance of a new monarch, or at least a regent. We do not allow chaos to take root. The old woman's lips curved in a smirk. You say it so easily, but I suppose you've done your thinking. Very well. House Tyrell will play its part for a price. We want assurances. When the dust settles, the Tyrells must not be cast aside. Our seat in the Reach must remain secure. If that means an independent North, so be it. But the Tyrells will not relinquish a certain recognition for their efforts. Robb exchanged a quick glance with Catelyn. She nodded imperceptibly. You have our word, Robb said. We will support House Tyrell's continued prosperity and influence. We do this together or not at all. Olenna leaned back in her chair, one hand resting on her cane, her gaze flicking between Robb and Catelyn. After a moment, she uttered a short, decisive laugh. Well, well, let's see if we can seize a throne by cunning and courtesy. Shall we? Garth will hash out details with your men. I suggest we keep this circle small. My granddaughter is still in King's Landing. Please note, I have plans to extricate her if we see an opening. Once I am assured of that, you will have full cooperation from me. We'll starve out the city from the inside if we must. The moment they realize the grain caravans aren't arriving, the Lannisters will be undone. Catelyn almost smiled. This alliance was monstrous and precarious, treason by any name, but it gave them the best chance to free Sansa, perhaps find Arya, and end the war quickly. Then let's set the plan, she said, a hushed determination in her voice. Olenna waved her hand, beckoning Garth forward. He unrolled a map on the table. It depicted the crownlands, the roads leading to King's Landing, the city walls, and the distribution of farmland around the region. We shall do this carefully, he murmured, and with subtlety. The first step will ensure supply lines out of the reach are delayed or diverted, forcing the city to look elsewhere for food. Meanwhile, the gold cloaks will be approached by certain agents we've placed among them, men who owe their fortunes to House Tyrell's generosity. The Watch is not as loyal to the Lannisters as you might think. The second step, we coordinate with your armies, King Robb s. Oh, they put pressure on the Lannisters in the field. Tywin can't come riding to rescue the city if he's pinned down near Harrenhal or the Blackwater Rush. Once the city is sufficiently weakened, disheartened by hunger and uncertainty, our man on the inside triggers a revolt or at least an internal power shift. That's when we strike. Robb could hardly believe it. If they pulled it off, they'd take King's Landing in days, not months. The cost in lives would be far less than open war. We need to prepare for the worst, he cautioned. If the Lannisters discover the plan, they won't hesitate to burn the city or kill hostages. I'll handle the Lannisters, Olenna said briskly. They underestimate me, but that underestimation is precisely my advantage. They hashed out details in the fading light, the voices echoing softly beneath the vines. The plan was set, though it was by no means guaranteed. In a realm of shifting alliances and twisted loyalties, any plan this bold would require constant adaptation. But as dusk descended over Highgarden, Robb Stark realized that for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of genuine hope. If they succeeded, his sisters might be safe, the war might end, and the North could be free from the clutches of Lannister tyranny. He looked into Olenna Tyrell's calculating eyes and saw, beyond the dryness and the biting wit, a resolute purpose, one that mirrored his own. We move soon, she said, as a servant lit the lanterns in the courtyard. Or not at all. Agreed. Agreed, Robb said. And so, the alliance was forged in a hush of parted lips, sealed not by written signatures but by a single firm handshake over the map of the Seven Kingdoms. Rumors began to swirl in the Crownlands soon after. Grain shipments that once arrived weekly now came sporadically or not at all. Prices soared. The gold cloaks, harried by the tension in the capital, muttered about late payments and broken promises. The small folk grumbled in hungry discontent. King Joffrey, enthroned in the Red Keep, hurled insults at the council, demanding they fix the problem. Cersei Lannister paced the halls of Maegor's Holdfast, suspecting foul play but unable to pin it down exactly. Meanwhile, Tywin Lannister was locked in a standstill near Harrenhal, torn between returning to the capital and maintaining a solid presence in the field to counter Robb Stark. Within a month, King's Landing was on the brink of scarcity. Bread riots broke out in Flea Bottom. The Master of Coin, struggling, tried to negotiate with the merchants, but the caravans from the Reach had slowed to a trickle. It was rumored that the Tyrell wagons had been delayed by bandits or waylaid by storms. None believed these excuses, yet none could prove otherwise. Peter Baelish, the ever-watchful Littlefinger, tried to piece together the puzzle. He had built half his fortune on trade and brothels, and he prided himself on sniffing out secrets. But Olenna Tyrell had used the subtlety of her spymaster Garth to mask the traces, bribing key informants, playing certain lords against each other. Varys, the master of whispers, heard whispers, but found that for every rumor of Tyrell betrayal, there was a contradictory rumor or a distraction that led him astray. The city was a labyrinth of half-truths. The delicate web tightened as Robb Stark's forces launched feints along the borders of the Crownlands. He sent small detachments to raid supply lines loyal to the Lannisters, ensuring that help would not easily arrive. Roose Bolton and the Great John feigned grand maneuvers, forcing Tywin to hold his ground. The king in the north, meanwhile, kept most of his host hidden near the Blackwater Rush, out of easy reach. He waited with mounting tension, dispatching ravens to High Garden. So far, the plan was on track. The city was slowly suffocating, and the fuse of discontent had been lit. Deep inside the Red Keep, Margaery Tyrell played her own game carefully. She smiled sweetly at Joffrey, endured his tirades with demure patience, and orchestrated lavish dinners that only half disguised the growing want in the city. In her private chambers, she received a coded message from her grandmother, delivered in the small hours by a handmaiden. Margaery read it once, burning the parchment soon after. She kept her composure, for she knew eyes were everywhere, but her heart raced. The time was coming, and with it, deliverance. Cersei Lannister stood on a balcony overlooking the city that was half-starved, her green eyes narrowing. She wore a gown of deep crimson, a subtle statement of Lannister pride. Beside her stood Jaime Lannister in gleaming armor, his posture stiff. At the far end, Tyrion Lannister, the hand of the king, sipped wine and tried to hide his concern. "Where is our food, Tyrion?" Cersei demanded, barely suppressing a snarl. "The small folk cry out. They riot, they loot, and they say the king does not care." "The shipments from the Reach are delayed," Tyrion said, swirling the wine in his cup, "which is either a remarkable coincidence of weather and bandits or treachery," Jaime interjected, running a hand over his golden hair. "The Tyrells turned on us once before. They might do it again." Cersei's lips pressed tight. "We must ensure they know the price of betrayal. Perhaps I should have Margaery put in a cell until her family sees reason." Tyrion's eyes flickered. "If you do that, my dear sister, you only accelerate their betrayal. We must handle this with some measure of subtlety. For all we know, the Tyrells are simply incompetent at protecting their wagons, or are waiting for a better price. I can open negotiations with them, promise them a bigger share of the crown's treasury. If it is gold they want, gold we can provide." Cersei turned on him, venom in her tone. "We cannot negotiate from a position of perceived weakness. If they smell blood, they'll strike. The Tyrells are like flowers with hidden thorns." Jaime exhaled. "Still, starving the city is a provocation. We must do something quickly. The small folks' anger might turn on us." Cersei turned back to the view, the glowing sprawl of King's Landing spread below. "Bring me Grand Maester Pycelle," she said at last. "We'll see if he knows anything about these shipments. And Tyrion, if you must throw more gold at the merchants, do so, but keep Margaery under close watch. If her family truly means to starve us, we'll need her as leverage." Tyrion nodded absently, drifting away. Jaime stayed, exchanging a glance with his sister. Cersei's jaw was tight, her fists balled. "If father were here," she whispered, "he'd root out the traitors in a heartbeat." Jaime placed a hand gently on her arm. "Father isn't here. We'll have to manage ourselves." In the labyrinth of the Red Keep, Margaery Tyrell's role grew riskier by the day. She held gatherings of ladies, feigning unwavering loyalty, all the while relaying cryptic messages to Lady Olenna. She steeled herself to keep composure before Joffrey, who grew crueler with each passing day. He would rage at the rumors of hunger, call for heads on spikes if the riotous masses didn't calm. In private, he sneered at Margaery, mocking her for the inability of her family to supply the city. She forced smiles, all the while longing for the moment when her grandmother's plan would set her free. Peter Baelish, that sly creature, hovered about her, asking prying questions in his polite, insinuating voice. She learned quickly to deflect. She disguised her knowledge well, but she suspected he smelled something amiss. She only had to pray that the final blow came before Baelish could unravel the scheme. At dusk on a cool autumn day, Robb Stark sat in his field tent near the Blackwater Rush, reading the latest dispatch from Highgarden. It arrived by Raven, delivered by one of the Tyrell's trusted knights. The missive carried a single line in Olenna's unmistakable scrawl. "The city is ripe. Our own are in place. Strike swiftly." Robb's breath quickened. He rose and donned his armor, grimly aware that his next steps could decide the fate of the realm. Outside, in the flickering torchlight, his bannermen gathered. Roose Bolton, tall and pale, wore a calm mask as always. The Great John cracked his knuckles, eager for battle. Catelyn looked worried, but resolute. "My lords," Robb announced quietly, "the moment is at hand. Lady Olenna's allies within King's Landing are ready. Once we advance, they will stir unrest within the city guard. Open the gates if possible. If not, we'll force them. Either way, we must approach with caution and speed. The Lannisters still hold the Red Keep, and we cannot underestimate their capacity for brutality if cornered." He outlined the final plan: a swift ride to the city with a select force, while the bulk of the Northern Army feigned a push against Tywin's flank. With Tywin's scouts reporting the main body of the army moving, the Old Lion would hesitate to depart Harrenhal, unsure if King's Landing was truly threatened. Meanwhile, Robb's specially chosen riders, fast, lightly armored, would circle behind and race to the city from an unexpected direction. Roose Bolton's expression never wavered as he listened. When Robb finished, Bolton said, "Our success hinges on secrecy. A small force might slip through the outskirts undetected, but if we're seen too soon, the gates will be shut tight. King's Landing has a large garrison. We must rely on the Tyrell infiltration to ensure the gold cloaks don't oppose us en masse." "We rely on it," Robb said, meeting Bolton's gaze with quiet determination. "You'll handle the main army, my lord. Keep Tywin pinned. I'm taking the Great John, my personal guard, and a few hundred picked riders, men I trust not to break formation. Once we're inside, we head straight for the Red Keep. We secure the king, the queen mother, and the entire royal retinue. If we do it swiftly, they'll have no time to stage a last-ditch stand." The Great John let out a booming laugh. "I'd rather face them in open battle, but if you say cunning is needed, cunning we shall bring. I can't wait to see Joffrey's face when we walk into his throne room." Robb offered a thin smile, but his mind turned to Sansa, Arya, the countless innocents who might be caught in the crossfire if this went awry. "Remember," he said, "we want to end this war, not burn the city." "Understood," murmured Bolton, bowing lightly. "May the old gods guide us." At that, the war horns sounded across the camp. Men snapped to attention, gathering weapons, checking horses, quenching campfires. Robb donned the mantle of the king in the north, though it felt heavier than ever before. Yet, beneath the weight of duty, hope burned bright. Hope that this would be the blow to end Lannister rule, free his sisters, and bring peace to the realm. Night cloaked the fields outside King's Landing, stars glimmering faintly through a patchwork of clouds. The hush of the hour was broken only by the distant surf of Blackwater Bay and the nervous whinny of horses. Robb Stark, wearing plate armor etched with the direwolf sigil, rode at the head of his small column. At his side, gray wind padded through the darkness, eyes glowing. Behind him, the Great John swayed on a massive warhorse, his sword at the ready, while close to 300 mounted men followed in tight formation. They approached the city from the west, near the old road that cut through the hills. The main gates of King's Landing rose ahead, lit by torches along the battlements. Atop the walls, gold cloaks paced, unaware that the king in the north was mere yards away, hidden by darkness and the cunning of House Tyrell's infiltration. Robb halted his men behind a low ridge, scanning the gate. If Olenna's plan worked, a signal would come. A raised lantern or an abrupt cessation of lights on the parapet. Something to indicate that the men on watch were loyal to the Tyrell cause or at least bribed enough to open the gates quietly. Moments stretched into agonizing minutes. Every creak of leather or snort of a horse felt too loud. Robb held his breath, his heart thrumming like a drum. Then, a single torchlight on the wall flickered 3 times. This was their agreed signal. The next moment, the heavy portcullis began to rattle upward. The iron gates parted slightly. A wave of relief and adrenaline coursed through Robb. "Now," he hissed. Kicking his horse into motion, he led the charge down the slope at a controlled gallop. They swept through the gate, where 6 gold cloaks stood to the side, feigning ignorance or perhaps dazed by bribes. Robb's men passed unopposed, hooves ringing out on the cobblestones of King's Landing. The city beyond the gates was eerily quiet, the hour late, the common folk asleep or cowering in their hovels. The riders pressed on, forging toward the Red Keep. They would face the real danger there, where the Lannisters' loyal guards still patrolled. Robb knew stealth could only last so long. The clash was inevitable, yet they met fewer guards than expected. A handful of skirmishes broke out, alleyway confrontations with gold cloaks or Lannister household guards unprepared for a sudden northern incursion. But Tyrell coin or persuasion had done its work. Many watchmen simply stood aside, uncertain of their orders, or looked the other way altogether. In mere minutes, Robb's force reached the foot of the Red Keep's outer walls. Within the keep, horns of alarm finally began to sound. Torchlight flared along the ramparts. Shouts echoed from the courtyard. Gates clanked, and the fortress roused to life. The moment of surprise was gone. Now came the fight. Robb did not hesitate. "Archers, forward!" he shouted. A squad of northern archers dismounted and began loosing arrows at the guards on the walls. The Lannister men tried to form a defensive line, but the shock was too sudden. The Great John bellowed a war cry, driving the men forward. They crashed into the courtyard, swords flashing in torchlight. For Robb, it was a whirlwind of chaos. Grey wind leapt at a Lannister guard, sinking fangs into his arm. Robb parried a spear thrust, using the pommel of his sword to knock the guard unconscious rather than slay him outright. He wanted the city not a massacre, but the Lannister guardsmen, frightened or enraged, fought back. Clashes erupted across the courtyard. Steel rang on steel. Horses reared. Shouting men fell into heaps of blood-smeared cobblestone. From a balcony above, a voice shrieked, "Stop them, you fools!" Robb glanced upward. There was Joffrey, pale-faced, flanked by 2 Kingsguard. He peered down with wild-eyed fury, brandishing a crossbow. Near him stood Cersei, her expression tight with panic. Tyrion was nowhere in sight, nor was Marjorie. The courtyard churned with bodies and the stench of battle. Robb signaled to the Great John. Together, they led a charge up the main steps into the keep, cutting down or driving aside the last pockets of resistance. A swirl of cloak on the left, a Kingsguard knight lunged. Ser Meryn Trant, recognizable by the sneer on his face. Robb met him blade to blade, gray wind growling at the edge of his vision. They exchanged a series of furious blows. Ser Meryn was strong, but Robb's training in the yard at Winterfell, plus the unwavering will fueled by Ned Stark's memory, spurred him on. He forced Meryn's sword aside and slammed the knight with his shield. Meryn stumbled. Gray wind sprang, latching onto the knight's shoulder, tearing through plate and padding. Ser Meryn howled. He collapsed in a haze of blood, and Robb stepped past, heart pounding. The Great John was already at the doors, wrestling them open with 6 men. They spilled inside, encountering a final knot of Lannister soldiers. The Great John roared, hacking through them. Robb moved quickly, bypassing this confrontation. He had to reach Joffrey and Cersei before they vanished into the maze of corridors. He found them on a landing above, cursing and flinging open a side door. 2 Kingsguard stood guard. One advanced, sword raised, but Robb had the advantage of momentum. He slammed into the guard's shield, knocking him off balance. Gray wind lunged for the man's leg, and the white cloak went down screaming. The second guard stared at the savage direwolf, hesitated, then turned and ran. At the far end of the corridor, Cersei and Joffrey stood back to back, trapped at a dead end. Cersei's lips peeled back in anger, Joffrey's eyes wide with terror. "Stay away, you filthy traitor," Joffrey screeched, aiming his crossbow with trembling hands. He loosed a bolt that whirled past Robb's shoulder, striking the wall harmlessly. Robb advanced step by measured step. He could have ended the Boy King with an arrow or a lunge, but he needed him alive. The realm needed an end to the war, not the gruesome spectacle of a butchered child king. Grey Wind snarled, poised to spring if Joffrey made another move. Cersei's eyes darted to the side, searching in vain for an escape. She spat at Robb. "You will die for this insolence, Stark. My father will." "Your father is pinned by my forces," Robb said coldly. "King's Landing is all but taken. Enough blood has been shed. Surrender." Joffrey's finger twitched on the crossbow's trigger. He tried to reload another bolt, but his hands shook so badly that it clattered to the floor. I am the king," he shrieked, voice cracking. "I'll have your head." Robb eyed him with a mixture of disgust and pity. "Then command me to kneel," he said softly, stepping closer until his sword's point hovered near the boy's throat. Joffrey froze, tears of rage and fear gathering in his eyes. Cersei let out a shaky breath. "No," she whispered. "Joffrey, stand down." Robb seized the moment. He reached forward and ripped the crossbow from Joffrey's grip, tossing it aside. Grey Wind bared his teeth at Cersei, who flinched. Robb shouted for his men. Half a dozen of his riders swarmed into the corridor, brandishing weapons, but Robb held up a hand. "Take them alive," he ordered. The last flicker of defiance in Cersei's green eyes dimmed. She drew Joffrey close, as though he were still a small child. Robb's men took their weapons, binding their hands. The Boy King trembled, eyes darting nervously. "Mother," he whimpered. "Mother." She said nothing, only watched Robb with pure hatred etched on her features. Robb could hear chaos from deeper in the keep, the clashing of steel fading as more Lannister men surrendered or were subdued. The plan had worked. The capital had fallen with minimal destruction compared to a drawn-out siege. The Red Keep was in northern hands and Tyrell hands, for as Robb led the captives back into the courtyard, he found Garth Bannister and a small contingent of Tyrell soldiers arriving through the gates, greeted by the cheers of northern riders. In that moment, seeing the Tyrell rose alongside the dire wolf of House Stark, Robb felt a surge of triumph. But he knew it was not over. They had to secure the city, quell any lingering Lannister loyalists, and ensure a stable aftermath. Yet, with Joffrey and Cersei in chains, half the battle for the throne was already won. By dawn, the city was strangely calm. Word spread like wildfire. Joffrey Baratheon had been taken captive, and the king in the north was in the Red Keep. No mass executions were carried out. Robb Stark's men patrolled the streets, distributing bread from stores taken in the keep's pantries, thanks to Margaery Tyrell's knowledge. The small folk, exhausted by hunger and corruption, looked on with cautious relief. Perhaps things would finally change. Inside the throne room, wide beams of sunlight illuminated the towering Iron Throne. Robb stood at its foot, flanked by Catelyn and several Hern lords. On the steps of the dais, Olenna Tyrell sat in a chair, observing the aftermath with a calculating eye. Tyrion Lannister had been found as well. He stood among a cluster of captives, his expression a mixture of resignation and sardonic amusement. Varys was nowhere to be seen, fled or hidden in the walls. Peter Baelish also was missing, though the city gates were guarded. Jaime Lannister had been captured in the fighting near the main gatehouse. He and Cersei stood together, silent and sullen. At Olenna's side, Margaery Tyrell waited, elegantly dressed in deep green. She caught Robb's eye with a small, imperceptible nod. Through cunning, they had reached this moment. Robb stepped forward. He turned, surveying the hall full of onlookers. Gold cloaks, those who had either been bribed or simply deserted the Lannisters, bowed their heads. Ambassadors from various corners of Westeros, who had cowered in the city, gathered to see the new order. Prisoners knelt, their wrists bound. "This war has caused the realm untold grief," Robb began, his voice echoing in the vaulted space. I did not come here to conquer the South. I came to free my sisters, to end Lannister tyranny, to bring justice for Ned Stark, who was executed unjustly. House Tyrell shares a vision for peace and stability in the realm. Together, we have saved King's Landing from a long, bloody siege. We have Joffrey Baratheon in custody. We have Cersei Lannister, Jaime Lannister, Tyrion Lannister, the pillars of Lannister power. Their crimes will be addressed. A shuffle passed through the onlookers. Tyrion spoke up, voice mild. And will I be addressed as well, King in the North? I had my own part to play at times, but not all Lannisters share the same guilt. Robb glanced at the dwarf. He felt a pang of uncertainty. He knew Tyrion was rumored to be the most reasonable Lannister, yet still a Lannister. He had been Hand of the King under Joffrey. How complicit was he? That is for a fair tribunal to decide, Robb said at last. Not me alone. The days of summary execution are over. Olenna Tyrell cleared her throat. Indeed, one does so hate the rude spectacle of heads rolling if it can be avoided. Her gaze flicked to Cersei and Joffrey. Sometimes it can't be avoided, but let us see. Cersei hissed under her breath, fury in her eyes. Jaime stared straight ahead, his face unreadable. Joffrey glowered, tears drying on his cheeks. Robb continued, We have secured the city. The next step is forging a new path for the realm. I have no desire to sit on the Iron Throne. Let that be known. My father taught me that the North is our responsibility. We will see it safe and free from unjust burdens. But for the rest of the realm, we must choose a ruler who can heal these wounds and lead with wisdom. A hush settled over the gathered crowd. Olenna raised an eyebrow. A lofty ambition, she said. But the throne doesn't seat itself. Someone must claim it. Or must we hold an election like the free folk across the narrow sea? A faint, wry smile crossed Robb's lips. I claim only the freedom of the North. For the Iron Throne, there is a rightful heir in Stannis Baratheon, though I know his measure is debated. Some might see young Tommen or Myrcella as less cruel than Joffrey, but they are of Lannister blood. The realm must decide if that is acceptable after all that has happened. Perhaps the Great Council of Lords is needed to weigh the claims properly. The idea of a Great Council caused a stir. It was not common but had precedent. At once, lords began to murmur about the complexities. If Stannis marched on King's Landing, would he accept the city in northern control? Would the Martells of Dorne object? The Stormlands? The Vale, which had remained neutral so far, might step forward with demands. So many pieces were in play. Robb recognized the swirl of chaos that could easily descend. He turned to Olenna. Lady Tyrell, your counsel would be invaluable. The city relies on your house for food. Will you assume a regency or help guide the realm until a great council can be convened? Olenna gave a short laugh. You flatter an old woman. But yes, I have spent enough time among cunning courtiers. If that is the will of the new power in King's Landing, I'll serve as a caretaker of sorts, with the assistance of able lords. We'll restore order, feed the people, and see that a rightful monarch is chosen. Marjorie, my dear, you'll be busy too. If that suits you. Marjorie dipped her head. I am always ready to serve the realm, grandmother. Robb surveyed the throne room. He could sense the relief among those who had feared a savage conquest. This was not that. This was a takeover by cunning, by an alliance as improbable as a rose and a direwolf. He drew a breath. Until a rightful claimant is placed upon the throne, King's Landing shall be governed by a council of the noble houses willing to work for peace. The North will withdraw, leaving a small contingent here to ensure no further conflict arises. We are not here to rule you, only to end the war. You speak so generously, Tyrion observed, a faint grin tugging at his lips. It's a rare thing in the capital, generosity without trickery. Robb eyed him carefully. Perhaps you've encountered too few Starks. Then, turning to the broader assembly, he proclaimed, Henceforth, I call for the immediate release of all northern hostages in the city. That includes my sister, Sansa Stark. From the edge of the hall, there was a stir as a young girl with auburn hair slipped through the crowd. Sansa, wearing a simple gown, face pale, eyes brimming with emotion. She saw Robb, halted in disbelief, then rushed forward. Robb moved to her, arms open, but kept his sword in hand for caution. He met her halfway, pulling her into an embrace. Sansa trembled, relief flooding her. She looked older and yet so fragile. "Robb," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "You're safe," he murmured, swallowing a lump in his throat. "It's over." Catelyn swept forward, wrapping her daughter in a tight hug. Tears shone in the Lady of Winterfell's eyes. For a moment, the burdens of war fell away, replaced by the warmth of family reunited. Nearby, watchers in the throne room sensed the poignancy of the reunion. Even some of the captive Lannisters turned their eyes aside. Robb's joy, however, was tempered by the knowledge that Arya remained missing. He did not voice it here, but the question burned in him. Where was his little sister, that wild spark of the Stark name? Even in triumph, the war had stolen pieces of their family he wasn't sure he could ever reclaim. But for now, victory rang clear. The city was theirs. The Lannisters, dethroned. House Tyrell rose in influence, forging a new future for the South. And the North might yet find the peace it craved. As the next few days unfolded, the tasks of governance began in earnest. Olenna Tyrell, with the cunning assistance of Garth Bannister, took the lead in reorganizing the City Watch. Marjorie worked tirelessly to ensure bread and other provisions were distributed among the starving populace. Robb Stark, after conferring with his lords, decided to keep only a modest garrison in King's Landing, a few hundred men to safeguard the ongoing transition, while the rest would march back north, or at least to the Riverlands, ensuring the realm recognized that the Starks did not intend to occupy the south. 100 concerns sprouted like weeds. Lannister bannermen to the west, sworn to Tywin, might not accept the turn of events so easily. There was talk that Tywin, upon hearing of the capital's fall, was in a rage, vowing to march on King's Landing. Yet, with the city so decisively taken, more lords began to abandon the Lannister cause, tired of war and tyranny. The pendulum of power swung swiftly. Some rumored that Tywin had retreated to the Westerlands to regroup at Casterly Rock, rather than face the combined might of the North and the Reach. No one could be certain. Ravens flew in every direction, carrying news of the capitulation. In the Red Keep, a self-styled Regency Council formed. Olenna Tyrell presided over it with a sharp tongue and a sharper mind. Representatives of various houses, both southern and northern, joined to discuss the immediate matters of rebuilding. Tyrion Lannister was compelled to assist, ironically, for his financial acumen was unmatched, and the city needed a coin master. He did so with reluctant cooperation, though it was well known that once the Great Council convened, his fate, like that of his siblings, would be judged. Jaime, under heavy guard, refused to speak much at all. Cersei, seething, spent her days caged in a modest chamber, stripped of her fine gowns and forced to watch from a balcony as the city carried on without her. Joffrey remained under constant watch, no crossbows at his disposal, whimpering about how he would have everyone's heads once his father came. Sansa Stark emerged from her nightmares with careful steps, leaning on her mother's unwavering love. She did not speak of the horrors she endured under Joffrey's cruelty, but her eyes told the story. She found moments of solace with Marjorie Tyrell, who comforted her, both of them reflecting on their shared captivity under that monstrous boy king. Sansa also found gratitude for her grandmother's cunning. Though she had not known the extent of Olenna's power, she now saw how this old woman had orchestrated a quiet revolution. One morning, Robb met with Olenna in the solar once used by Cersei herself. Sunlight poured through the high windows, illuminating a table strewn with documents and raven scrolls. Robb was exhausted by the constant negotiations, longing for the North's crisp air, but he forced himself to remain vigilant. Olenna was reviewing a message from the Vale. It appears that Lady Lisa Arryn is content to remain behind the Aerys' high walls, as useless as teats on a boar, Olenna said with a sarcastic drawl. Still, it's better than open opposition. The Vale is neutral, if nothing else. That leaves Dorne, The Martells might be amenable to a stable realm if we guarantee them certain privileges. The Stormlands are in chaos, with no clear leadership after Renly's death. And Stannis, well, word has it he holds Dragonstone, mustering a fleet, but he's quieter these days. Perhaps he sees the city is already lost to him. Robb rubbed his temples. If the realm can accept a great council, maybe we can settle these claims without further bloodshed. The North will withdraw from the capital once that council is set, so we can handle our own matters. Olenna eyed him curiously. Your father was an honorable man, Ned Stark. Some would say too honorable for King's Landing. You strike me as a more pragmatic sort with a measure of that northern honor. It's a rare combination. Robb inclined his head. I owe it to my people to end this war swiftly. The Tyrells have done much to make that happen, and I won't forget it. She gave a small, satisfied nod. See that you don't, boy. Then Garth Bannister entered, giving a short bow. My lady, news from the Westerlands. Tywin Lannister is retreating to Casterly Rock. Some bannermen are deserting him, uncertain if they should join the new order. He might hold out for a time, but his hopes of retaking the capital are gone unless he finds new allies. A glimmer of triumph lit Olenna's face. The lion skulks back to its den. Does it? Good. Let him stew. Still, Garth went on, the Lannisters possess great gold reserves. Tywin might well attempt to buy new allies or mercenaries from Essos. The realm remains volatile. Robb nodded grimly. We can't force the entire West to heal, but with Tywin losing prestige, perhaps we can secure a truce. If he remains behind his walls, we can let him be, so long as he doesn't threaten the throne again. He paused, gaze shifting to Olenna. You've done your part, and we've done ours. The city is ours, the war all but ended. Is there anything else? A quiet humor danced in Olenna's eyes. You wish to be off, I see. The North calls. Very well. But the Tyrells do expect courtesy, as we agreed. We shall hold a celebratory feast tonight. A show for the city, to let them see that we do not intend to starve them any longer. We'll open the Red Keep stores, distribute food, show ourselves as benefactors. Your presence would be most welcome, King in the North. Robb considered, wanting desperately to leave, but he knew politics demanded at least this one gesture of unity. I will attend, he said, for one night, then I must depart. That evening, the Red Keep's great hall glowed with torchlight and the flicker of lanterns. Tables overflowed with bread, fresh fruit, roasted meats, and flagons of wine. The small folk were not permitted inside the keep itself, but casks of ale and carts of bread were sent into the city beyond the walls. Music drifted through the corridors, a surprisingly festive note in a place that mere days ago had witnessed a coup. At the high table sat Robb Stark, his mother beside him, Olenna Tyrell on the other side. Marjorie circulated among the guests, a charming hostess despite the tension that must still weigh on her heart. Several northern lords attended, including the Great John, who boomed laughter at every jest. Tyrion Lannister sat in subdued silence, though not bound. Under guard's watchful eye, he drank wine in measured sips. Jaime, separated from him, sat with grim resignation, ignoring the food. Cersei was absent, locked in her chambers. Joffrey, too, was nowhere to be seen, for no one wished to see or hear his tantrums. Servants bustled about, replenishing platters and pitchers. A troupe of musicians played lively tunes, some local, some from the Reach. The mood was oddly jovial, as though the city sought to celebrate deliverance from hunger and tyranny. Or perhaps it was simply relief that, for the moment, no swords were drawn. Robb half listened to the Greatjon's boisterous tales, eyes scanning the hall. He spotted Sansa across the way, quietly picking at her food, a faint smile forced upon her face. She seemed weighed down by memory. A shadow of fear lingered in her expression, though it softened when Marjorie offered a kindly word. Catelyn spoke with a pair of Reach lords, likely forging new ties for the future. The entire scene felt surreal to Robb, as though he were in a dream of harmony after so many nightmares. At length, Olenna rapped her cane on the floor, drawing the hall's attention. The music quieted. "Good people of King's Landing, northern guests, and those from the Reach," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "I welcome you to this feast of peace. House Tyrell is pleased to share the bounty of our harvest with the city, and we are glad to say that the war has not destroyed us utterly. Indeed, we gather here, side by side, Lannister and Stark and Tyrell alike, to usher in a new era." A cautious hush followed. Few missed her pointed reference to the Lannisters still present. Olenna continued, "We have endured a period of suffering under a careless crown, but House Tyrell, in alliance with House Stark, has reclaimed King's Landing to restore dignity and prosperity. The small folk shall no longer starve. The intrigues of unscrupulous courtiers shall no longer overshadow the well-being of the people. Now we may look forward to the Great Council, where the rightful shape of the realm will be decided." She bowed her head slightly toward Robb. "And let it be known that the king in the north has shown mercy to those captured. We do not seek slaughter. We seek stability. May the Seven guide us all." A smattering of applause filled the room, growing as more of the guests joined in. Robb inclined his head in acknowledgement. He stood. "We have accomplished something rare, taken the city without burning it to the ground. We owe that to diplomacy, cunning, and a shared desire to end suffering. Let us hope the realm follows this example." The applause resumed, and the music struck up again. Servants brought more food and drink. For a time, the conversation turned to lighter topics, an uneasy, hopeful normalcy creeping back. Later, Robb found a moment's respite on a balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay. The night air was balmy, stars shimmering overhead. He leaned on the stone railing, thinking of Winterfell, wondering how his brothers Bran and Rickon fared, whether they'd even understand what had happened here. He heard a light step behind him and turned to see Margaery Tyrell approaching, arms folded in front of her. "Your Grace," she said softly, "I hope you don't mind. I needed air." He offered a faint smile. "Of course, my lady. This is your home now." She let out a gentle laugh. "Home, yes, though part of me yearns to return to Highgarden. King's Landing was never truly home. It's a den of vipers. But now, perhaps it can be something else. My grandmother says we must seize the chance to mold it anew." Robb nodded. "I admire her resolve. Without her, I doubt we could have done this so swiftly." Margaery's eyes flickered with gratitude. She's a remarkable woman, indeed. I only regret that I couldn't have done more sooner. She paused, clearly remembering her captivity as Joffrey's betrothed. She hesitated, then took a small step closer to Robb. "Thank you for not turning the city into a battlefield, for giving my family a chance to avoid slaughter. So many times the Tyrells have been used and cast aside by kings or claimants. I think my grandmother was weary of seeing the Reach exploited." Robb looked away, suddenly uncomfortable with praise. "I did only what was necessary. The realm has bled too much already." She studied him, the torches from the hall reflecting in her warm brown eyes. "And your sisters, your family, how they must rejoice in your victory. I've seen Sansa, and I hope she can recover from what she suffered. She's a sweet girl. If there's anything I can do—" "Thank you," Robb murmured, a tightness in his chest. "I worry about her. She's been through so much. We still don't know where Arya is. And my brothers, Winterfell was attacked. I can only trust that they are safe. There's so much left undone." Margaery placed a gentle hand on his arm, an unspoken solidarity. "I cannot imagine the burdens you carry, but at least here, in the capital, you've succeeded in something no one dared attempt: overthrowing the Lannisters by guile." Robb sighed. "It was Lady Olenna's brilliance that truly paved the way. I only provided the threat of northern steel. Now the realm is uncertain, but I'll do what I can to see it rebuilt. Soon, though, I will go north. That is my home." She smiled softly. "Of course, the North needs its king. Will you return someday to see how King's Landing fares?" Robb hesitated, scanning the distant lights of the harbor. "Perhaps," he said, "when the war is truly done, and if the new king or queen invites me, I'd come south under better circumstances. One day, maybe we can have true peace between our lands." She gave a wistful nod. "Peace between the Rose and the direwolf. I'd like that very much." They stood in silence for a moment, the night breeze caressing their faces. At length, Robb excused himself, feeling the weight of responsibilities pulling him back inside. Marjorie lingered, gazing out over the bay, lost in her own thoughts. For both of them, and for the Seven Kingdoms, this was only the beginning of a new chapter. The Lannisters might be cornered, but they were not yet extinct. Rival claimants to the throne loomed on the edges of the map. The fate of the realm was still uncertain, the next steps uncharted. Yet, for one night at least, King's Landing breathed freely, tasting a peace that had eluded eye. Tea for too long. The war was not over, but the city, battered and hungry, felt the first rays of dawn, and the alliance born of a rose and a wolf had, against all odds, brought down a golden lion, if only by a cunning, patient trap. Morning saw the king in the north riding out with his retinue. Sansa would remain for a time, at least until she felt strong enough to travel. Catelyn chose to stay with her daughter, helping her heal from the traumas inflicted by Joffrey. In their place, Roose Bolton and other trusted lords took charge of the partial northern garrison to ensure the capital stayed calm. Olenna Tyrell assured them that the City Watch now answered to her, and to the proposed council, rather than the Lannisters. The Red Keep itself still bustled with uncertainty, but the horns that sounded Robb's departure signaled a new dawn indeed. As he led his men through the city streets, the small folk watched quietly. Some offered shy waves or muffled cheers, grateful that these northerners had brought bread instead of sword and flame. Others stood silently, unsure if this change would truly last. Robb's face was somber. He knew how tenuous this peace was. Still, the fresh breeze carried a hint of possibility. They passed through the same gate they had entered so stealthily days before, the portcullis now raised in broad daylight. Ahead lay the road north, a long journey home. Gray wind loped beside Robb's horse, muzzle lifted. The Great John, riding close, broke into a grin. "Well, we did it, lad. Took the city, put the boy king in chains, all with nary a siege. My father's father would call it sorcery." Robb tried to summon a smile. "Diplomacy, cunning, and maybe a bit of luck. We'll see if it holds." The Great John laughed heartily. "Whatever it is, it's a victory. We'll drink to it in the north, mark my words." They spurred their horses onward, the columns winding away from King's Landing. Robb spared one last look at the walls, massive, imposing, yet now overshadowed by the Tyrell Rose banner and the Stark direwolf flapping in the southern breeze. The city would need to forge a new identity free of Lannister rule, and the North would watch from afar, hoping they had planted seeds of stability rather than the seeds of a new war. In the aftermath, as ravens carried tidings of the fall of King's Landing across the Seven Kingdoms, lords and ladies marveled at how swiftly it had happened. Many whispered that it was the cunning of Lady Olenna Tyrell, forging an alliance with the king in the north, that undid the Lannisters. Some told wild stories of infiltration and espionage. Others believed the Tyrell gold simply bought the entire City Watch. Whichever the truth, the result was undeniable. Joffrey Baratheon, once so feared, languished in a tower cell, pacing in circles, raging at his captors. Cersei cursed the day she ever underestimated the Tyrells. Jaime brooded, powerless to rescue his family's legacy. Tyrion played the game as best he could, but even his wit had limits under watchful eyes. The Great Council was called, though it would take time for the High Lords to gather. Dorne, the Vale, the Stormlands, the Iron Islands, each with its own agenda, would descend upon King's Landing to debate the future of the throne. Or they might not, if tempers flared and alliances shifted. Yet, in all corners, there was a sense that the Lannisters' iron grip had slipped. The North had proven its strength yet again, this time not by raw ferocity in battle, but by forging an unlikely alliance with the storied might of Highgarden. Some whispered that the realm was on the brink of a new golden age if the Tyrells and Starks maintained their vow of peace. Others claimed war would ignite anew once Stannis landed with his fleet or once Tywin unleashed new treacheries from the west. But for a fleeting moment, a hush fell over the land, a lull in the storm, as though the realm drew in a collective breath. In the rose gardens of Highgarden, Lady Olenna Tyrell would walk with a subtle pride, remembering how she outmaneuvered the lion and forced a diplomatic triumph. In the halls of Winterfell, once they were reclaimed and rebuilt, Robb Stark would pace before the great hearth, haunted by losses but determined to shape a better future for the North. And in King's Landing, children no longer starved in the streets as Tyrell wagons at last flowed into the city, distributing the bounty of the Reach. A new regency, led by the sharp-tongued Queen of Thorns, busied itself with patching the cracks in the kingdom's foundation. Yet the question remained, with the Lannisters in chains, who would wear the crown? Which banner would rise above the Iron Throne when the Great Council's deliberations ended? Some spoke Stannis' name, others murmured about a child of the Mad King rumored to live across the narrow sea. Even Tommen, sweet and malleable, had supporters among those who pitted the fiasco of Joffrey's reign. The Game of Thrones continued, pieces shifting across the board. But for now, those pieces rested in the hands of Olenna Tyrell and Robb Stark, who had shared a single audacious vision, that King's Landing, long dominated by fear and power, might be conquered by alliance and cunning rather than by rivers of blood. And in the hush that followed the swift capture of the city, the Seven Kingdoms wondered if, at last, it might find a measure of respite from the storms of war. Robb Stark's force clattered north out of King's Landing in the early light of dawn, a hush falling over the small folk who lined the streets to watch. The standard of the direwolf, once seen only in songs and rumors this far south, billowed overhead, the embroidered cloth rippling in the breeze that rose off Blackwater Bay. Robb led the column on a tall gray courser, his expression solemn and distant, as though the triumph of their swift occupation already weighed on him. The Great John rode nearby, calling his farewells in a booming voice that drew echoes off the high walls. Behind them trailed the disciplined ranks of northern men who had fought and bled since Ned Stark's death, and who now returned home victorious, or so they hoped. They reached the city's main gate, thrown open wide by the Tyrell-led watch as a courtesy and a salute. The same gates that had parted in the dead of night for their subtle intrusion now stood under the dawning sun, ushering them out in full view of any who might wonder if the king in the north planned to remain. There was no longer any doubt. Robb Stark had no intention of sitting the Iron Throne. He had come to free his sisters and end Lannister rule. Now he meant to go, leaving behind enough men to help Lady Olenna Tyrell keep order. The victory felt as brittle as a thawing river's ice, easy to crack and fall into ruin. When the last hoofbeats faded beyond the walls, the people of King's Landing stirred, as if waking from a vivid dream. The direwolf banners receded into the distance, replaced on the ramparts by the golden rows of House Tyrell and the watchful hawk-eyed presence of newly installed officers. Though martial law of a sort remained, there was no widespread brutality or purges in the streets. The new Regency Council, dominantly Tyrell, aided by a contingent of cautious northern officers, had pledged not to repeat the Lannisters' cruelties. Bread was distributed in Flea Bottom and along the Street of Flower, casks of ale and cider followed, and a subtle hope took root among the hungry small folk. Still, the city's mood was far from cheerful. The Red Keep teemed with uncertainty. Prisoners of high rank languished under guard or in modest chambers under lock and key. Tywin Lannister had not been captured. He remained in the Westerlands, seething according to every whispered rumor. Most believed he would never let such an affront stand. Fear of his retaliation hovered in the halls, a specter no lavish feast or barge of bread could fully banish. In the late afternoon of that same day, Olenna Tyrell took a slow, reflective walk along a newly cleaned gallery in the Red Keep, her cane tapping on the polished floor. She was accompanied by her spymaster and old friend, Garth Bannister, and 2 of her personal guards. Silent household knights in Tyrell livery flanked them, watchful. A faint breeze from an open window carried the salt tinge of Blackwater Bay, stirring the old woman's veil. "I've half a mind to see these chambers repainted," Olenna muttered, eyeing the battered columns and the sooty remnants of old braziers. Cersei Lannister clearly had no taste for color or comfort, only for displays of Lannister red. If we're to rule in the city's best interests, we need to dispel the gloom she left behind. An excellent idea, my lady, Garth said politely. He wore a subdued tunic and bore himself with the calm confidence of a man who had orchestrated many discreet missions in recent months. Morale matters, especially now that the small folk must learn to trust a new authority. We need them to see the keep as a place of administration, not terror. Olenna's dry laugh echoed. Administration is a dull word, dear Garth. But yes, we'll see to the city's needs. The small folk are easily swayed by bread and stable coin. Our true challenge lies in persuading the lords, those who remain in King's Landing or who will come for the Great Council, that the Tyrells are not petty usurpers. They reached the end of the gallery and stopped at a heavy door with steel hinges. A Tyrell guard pushed it open, revealing a small chamber beyond. Inside stood several figures around a table piled with scrolls. Margaery Tyrell, radiant even in her simplest gown. Tyrion Lannister, sitting with an air of restless intelligence. A few other minor noble functionaries from the Crownlands, newly appointed or retained from the previous regime. Margaery looked up and smiled, beckoning her grandmother closer. We've been reviewing the finances, grandmother. Lord Tyrion has insights into the crown's debts, which may be larger than we'd hoped. Tyrion inclined his head, face betraying neither fear nor amusement. He was a prisoner, yet allowed a degree of freedom under guard, for the city needed his skills. Lady Olenna, he greeted wryly. I can confirm that Littlefinger was adept at juggling figures in creative ways. The crown owes staggering sums to the Iron Bank of Bravos, as well as to various Tyroshi and Pentoshi lenders. Not to mention the Faith's gold. If we fail to maintain payments, the Iron Bank will turn to other claimants to recoup their coin, namely Lord Tywin or even Stannis Baratheon. They fund whoever promises them the best return. Olenna leaned on her cane, face composed. Oh, I do hate dealing with bankers, all sly smiles and quilled ledgers, but we'll do what must be done. Margaery, have we any notion of how much grain and produce we can supply the city with for free, or at reduced cost, before our coffers feel the pinch? Margaery exhaled. We have some months of surplus in the reach, especially after the good harvest. Though if we mean to keep King's Landing fed, the volume is enormous. Highgarden can send shipments regularly, but we'll need an organized system, someone to oversee distribution, storage, and shipping routes. And we can't simply pay for it all ourselves unless we charge the crown eventually. Olenna's mouth twitched. Charge the crown or whichever new monarch eventually sits on that jagged chair, yes. For the moment, we're bridging a gap. If we starve the city now, it undoes all our goodwill. That we cannot have. Tyrion drummed his fingers on the table. Let me propose something. If we set up a proper harbor toll, low enough not to anger the merchants, but enough to collect revenue from all incoming trade, we can start offsetting the costs of the free bread. The city is a central port, after all. Ships come for more than just grain. If carefully managed, it might keep the treasury afloat. Olenna gave him a piercing look. How kind of you to help, Master Tyrion. And presumably, you want something in return. Your freedom, perhaps? He offered a crooked smile. A fair trial, at least. I'm not so naive as to expect an immediate pardon. But I have no wish to see the city collapse into chaos. I lived here long enough to understand that if King's Landing starves, none of us benefit. Margaery looked between them, her gaze gentle but discerning. A harbor toll could be introduced carefully, grandmother. We can present it as a necessary measure for the city's recovery. And if it's made clear that we're no longer funneling coin into Lannister war efforts, the merchants might accept it. Olenna tapped her cane. Very well. Draft the decree. I'll see if the new council agrees. We must be cautious not to look like we're replicating the old regime's greed. And as for you, Tyrion Lannister, you remain under guard. Continue to make yourself useful, and perhaps the Great Council will look on you with mercy. Tyrion inclined his head again, lips twisting in a near smile. That is all I can ask. Olenna turned to Garth Bannister. Next item. Where is that spindly creature, Varys? I find it unsettling that we've no sense of him." Garth shook his head. "He vanished when our men took the castle. Some say he's hiding in the labyrinth of secret passages. Others claim he fled the city. No sign of Baelish either, though his brothels were empty. Likely he took what coin he could and fled. We've posted watchers at the gates and docks, but we cannot be certain." A sour expression crossed Olenna's face. "Two snakes slithering away. We should expect them to stir trouble from afar. Keep watch for letters or rumors. The moment either tries to meddle, I want to know." Garth bowed his head. "At once, my lady." Olenna gestured to the table. "Enough talk. Marjorie, we must finalize the letters inviting the lords to this great council. The realm will not wait forever, and the longer we delay, the more mischief men like Tywin can concoct." In the corridors beyond, Sansa Stark wandered alone, her footsteps echoing off the high walls. It was strange being free to come and go in the Red Keep, now that Joffrey languished in a tower cell. The memories clung to her. Harsh words, slaps, the sneers of court ladies who once mocked her betrothal to the Boy King. Every turn of the corridor felt haunted by the ghost of her own fear. Still, she could not deny the city's shift in atmosphere. The tension was different, no less precarious, perhaps, but the threat no longer came from Joffrey's personal cruelty. Her mother, Lady Catelyn, was with her day by day, lending comfort and gentle counsel. They had delayed returning north until Sansa felt stronger and until certain formalities of the new rule were settled. Her wandering steps led her toward a balustrade overlooking the Blackwater. At this hour, the sun made the water shimmer, and she paused to rest her elbows on the warm stone. A gull shrieked overhead. The sprawl of the city opened before her, a patchwork of pale roofs and winding streets that climbed the hills toward the septs and guildhalls. She sensed someone approaching and turned to see Marjorie Tyrell, accompanied by only one handmaiden some steps behind. Marjorie smiled softly. "Sansa, my dear, you look pensive." Sansa dipped her head. "Lady Marjorie, I was just thinking how strange it is to be free, yet still here. I can't help but remember." She cut herself off, biting her lip. Marjorie laid a gentle hand on her arm. "We can never forget what they did, but we can heal in time. Have you given thought to returning north with your mother?" "I want to," Sansa said, turning back to look at the shining water. "I miss Winterfell so much it hurts, but I'm afraid. The journey is long, and I wonder if King's Landing might need me, or if I might help ensure the Lannisters don't rise again." She shook her head, tears gathering unbidden. "I'm being foolish." "You're not foolish," Marjorie said kindly. "This city can be terrifying, but it's our hope, my grandmother's and mine, that someday King's Landing will be a place where people aren't prey for the powerful. For you, I'd say you owe yourself the peace of home." Sansa nodded, swallowing. "I'll go soon, I think. Maybe after the Great Council meets. Mother says we may wait just a little longer." Marjorie gazed out over the water, her expression reflecting a mix of compassion and weariness. "I understand. You've endured so much. If there's anything I can do in the meantime..." Sansa managed a small smile. "Thank you, my lady. You've already done more than you know." Marjorie squeezed her hand lightly. "Come, let's leave this gloomy balustrade. The kitchens have prepared lemon cakes again. A small treat, but one we both deserve." They turned from the overlook, walking side by side toward the keep's interior. Marjorie's handmaiden trailed at a respectful distance. Neither girl spoke of Joffrey's cell or the question of what punishments might await him, but the thought hovered, an unspoken shadow, as they strove for small pockets of solace in a place so steeped in turmoil. Far to the west, Tywin Lannister rode through the gates of Casterly Rock, his face set in lines of cold rage. He had traveled swiftly from the Riverlands once word reached him that King's Landing had fallen, that Joffrey and Cersei were taken, that a Tyrell Stark alliance had outmaneuvered him. Beside him rode a handful of loyal bannermen, some grim, some anxious. Inside the Rock's courtyard, household guards saluted hastily. Kevan Lannister, Tywin's loyal younger brother, stepped forward, expression wrought with concern. "My lord," Kevin said, bowing, "we received tidings from the capital. Is it as grave as the ravens say?" Tywin dismounted with a swirl of his cloak, dismissing his horse to the stable boys. His voice was harsh. "Worse. The city is in Tyrell hands, with Stark men garrisoning the Red Keep. Joffrey, Cersei, Jaime, all captives. Our power undone, Kevin. The unthinkable has happened." Kevin bowed his head. "How did we lose the city so suddenly, my lord? The ravens spoke of supplies cut off, the gold cloaks bribed, the gates opened in secret. Surely it cannot be so simple." Tywin gave a humorless laugh. "Nothing is simple, but I underestimated the Tyrell matriarch. That old woman has teeth as sharp as her wit. I gave them too little credit too soon after Renly's death. And that young wolf in the north used cunning instead of brute force for once. A potent combination." He strode across the courtyard, motioning for Kevin to follow him into the rock's interior. Tapestries adorned the walls of the main hall, gold thread glimmering in the lamplight, the proud lion of House Lannister emblazoned on scarlet. The fortress felt as solid as the mountains themselves, a testament to centuries of Lannister wealth. But beneath it all, the rock seemed to echo with Tywin's silent fury. Inside his private solar, Tywin dismissed the servants and whirled on Kevin the moment the doors shut. "We must regroup. The West shall not bow to these usurpers. But first we need an army, and the means to keep it fed and paid. The Tyrells have crippled us by seizing the capital's resources. They'll attempt to seal alliances with every major house. We must find a way to wrest the advantage back." Kevin cleared his throat, looking pained. "We have gold, of course, but the shipments from Lannisport and our mines won't be enough to field an army large enough to retake King's Landing by open force, especially if the Tyrells and the North are aligned. We might be outnumbered." "Indeed," Tywin said, his tone deadly calm, "but we have other levers of power. There's always the Iron Bank, and we could hire Sellsword companies from Essos if we must. We'll push them from multiple angles. Divide the Tyrells from the Starks if possible. The North still wants independence. The Tyrells want southern dominance. Their alliance is fragile. If we find the right wedge, we can crack it." Kevin listened, brow furrowed. "And our family in captivity, Cersei, Jaime, Joffrey?" Tywin's jaw tightened. "They chose to remain in the city. That was my mistake, believing the capital secure with Joffrey on the throne. For now, they serve as hostages. The Tyrells or the Starks might use them as bargaining chips. So be it. We must not allow sentiment to cloud our next moves. Cersei especially. Her presence in King's Landing was always a risk." Kevin lowered his gaze, suspecting Tywin's rage ran deeper than he let on. "If there is a way to ransom them," Tywin waved a dismissive hand. "We'll consider that. But the immediate concern is re-establishing Lannister influence. The Great Council they keep yammering about. Somehow we must attend or sabotage it. If the entire realm deems Joffrey unfit and anoints another, our hold on the throne is gone forever." Kevin hesitated. "My lord, with all respect, the realm already sees Joffrey as a bastard born of incest. Your hold on the throne is precarious. Even if we present Tommen or Myrcella, the scandal remains. Perhaps we should consider forging new alliances altogether." Tywin's eyes narrowed dangerously. Tommen or Myrcella might still be shaped into a claim. The Baratheon name is not wholly undone. If that fails, we bide our time. House Lannister has endured for centuries. We will not kneel to a rose or a wolf. A heavy silence lay between them. Kevin bowed, recognizing the finality in Tywin's words. The old lion would fight on. At Riverrun, Edmure Tully strolled along the battlements, scanning the horizon. The red fork shimmered below, and the banners of the Trout and Direwolf rippled over the gate. Riverrun had long been a seat of contention in the war, but with the fall of King's Landing and the subjugation of the Lannisters, the Riverlands found a brief reprieve. Robb Stark's forces were no longer pressed on every side. The once constant raids had ceased, at least for the moment. Even so, the Riverlands had been ravaged. Farms burned, small folk displaced, towns looted by one side or the other. Much rebuilding lay ahead. Edmure tried to quell a sense of anxiety. With King's Landing taken by the Tyrell Stark alliance, he had expected a decisive end to all conflict. Yet rumors whispered that Tywin Lannister regrouped at Casterly Rock, that the Greyjoys stirred along the coasts, that the Vale might claim old grievances. He turned at the sound of boots on stone steps. Roose Bolton appeared, pale-faced as ever, flanked by 2 silent men-at-arms. Bolton had returned from King's Landing a fortnight earlier, entrusted by Robb with the strategic oversight of the Riverlands, while the king in the north traveled farther north to address matters at Winterfell. "Lord Bolton," Edmure greeted stiffly. He had never fully trusted the man, though Robb had named him warden of the territory in the interim. Something about Roose's cold, unreadable manner unnerved him. Bolton inclined his head. "Lord Edmure, I trust the river defenses remain strong. As strong as they can be, given how many men we've lost," Edmure replied. "Your presence is a reminder that we're in uncertain times. How fare things at Harrenhal?" Bolton's pale eyes flicked beyond the battlements. "I've left a loyal garrison. The fortress remains a strategic point. If Tywin tries to push east, we'll have warning." Edmure nodded grudgingly. He studied Bolton's unreadable face. "The Lannisters are battered, but I wouldn't put it past Tywin to try something desperate. There's also word that the Great Council in King's Landing will convene soon. Perhaps the realm will officially confirm that Joffrey is no king." A faint tug at Bolton's lips resembled a smile. "We shall see. Sometimes these councils only inflame tensions. Men with claims appear from every corner. The Tyrells must be keen to steer it in their favor. Yes, they grow in power." Bolton's gaze rested on the Tully banners. "But so do the Starks. We have a king in the north who sacked King's Landing without turning it to ash. That tale alone will fill bard songs for decades. Let us hope it lasts." Edmure felt a ripple of unease. Something in Bolton's tone suggested an undercurrent of meaning. He forced a polite nod. "Indeed, my lord. We'll remain vigilant." Bolton gave no further clue to his thoughts. He simply turned and descended the steps, the hush of his cloak on stone echoing behind him. Edmure lingered at the battlements, watching the man's departing form, unable to shake the sense that beneath Roose Bolton's placid exterior, a calculating mind weighed every possibility, and that in these turbulent times, men like Bolton might seize any opening they found. Days stretched into weeks in King's Landing as the self-styled Regency Council issued proclamations in the name of the realm's welfare. Olenna Tyrell, with Marjorie often at her side, presided over the small sessions of governance that replaced Joffrey's old small council. Tyrion Lannister, though restricted in movement, became a de facto master of coin once again, for no one else could sort the tangle of crown debts so deftly. The city, starved of leadership and resources for so long, latched onto any semblance of stability. Outside the Red Keep, the common folk adapted to new market regulations and the Tyrell-sponsored bread distributions. Small repairs began on the city walls. The men of the City Watch, purged of the most corrupt or fervently Lannister-loyal elements, gained new recruits from the Reach. Despite all that, tensions simmered. Some among the populace, those who had once benefited from Lannister favoritism, muttered that the Tyrells were just another brand of usurper. Near the end of a long summer day, Olenna was seated in a windowed solar, reading dispatches by lamplight. A gold-embossed invitation lay before her on a small table, the official summons for the lords and ladies of Westeros to gather in King's Landing for the Great Council. Copies had gone out weeks before, carried by riders and ravens to every corner of the Seven Kingdoms. The time frame for arrival was set for a moon's turn hence, giving even the distant lords of Dorne and the Vale time to travel if they so chose. She heard a shuffling step and glanced up. Catelyn Stark approached, wearing the somber expression of one who had endured heartbreak after heartbreak. She inclined her head. "Lady Olenna, do you have a moment?" "For you, dear, always," Olenna replied with surprising warmth. She gestured to the seat beside her. "Sit. Is this about Sansa?" Partially, by the way Catelyn's eyes flickered. She settled into the chair, folding her hands in her lap. "We intend to depart King's Landing for the north within days, if possible. Sansa is not entirely recovered, but she longs for home, and I must see how my younger sons fare. We've had only scattered word from Winterfell since Theon Greyjoy's treachery." Olenna nodded. "Yes, the Greyjoy fiasco. Your ward, was he not? The rebellion was poorly timed for all of us. I've little doubt the Ironborn remain a menace." Catelyn's jaw tightened. "Even so, we have to go. The North needs us. And with Robb on the move as well, we hope to meet him at Moat Cailin or somewhere near the Neck. The question is, are there any formalities or conditions you require before I remove Sansa from the city? She's been a hostage for so long. I wouldn't want to violate any new arrangement." Olenna waved her cane dismissively. "Hostage no more, dear. The war was never your fault, and we have no claim on your daughter. We only ask for continuing goodwill between the Reach and the North. This so-called Great Council will deliberate the fate of the Iron Throne, but I doubt you or Sansa's presence is strictly necessary, unless you wish to testify against Joffrey or the others." Catelyn's face tightened with memory of Ned's execution. "That is a matter close to my heart, but I trust that the proof of Joffrey's crimes is overwhelming, and the realm can judge him without me. In truth, I have no appetite to see him ever again." Olenna hesitated, then patted Catelyn's arm with surprising gentleness. "Go then, reunite with your family. The Tyrells owe you more than you owe us, for we needed the North's might to accomplish what we have. I'll not hinder your journey." Relief softened Catelyn's features. "Thank you, my lady. You have shown more consideration than most in King's Landing ever have." They were quiet a moment. Olenna studied the flicker of the lamp. "When you speak with your son, remind him that House Tyrell stands by the agreements we forged. If Tywin rears his head, we'd expect King Robb to honor that alliance. Likewise, if something goes amiss with these councils, or if other claimants threaten the city, we'd appreciate the North's swift support. We do not want to be alone in the face of a new onslaught." Catelyn nodded gravely. "I'll see that Robb understands. I believe he does already. We owe you our thanks. Without your cunning, I shudder to think how many thousands would have died in a siege of King's Landing." Olenna gave a small, tight smile. "Yes, well, let us hope it was worth it." Catelyn rose, bowing slightly, and left the solar. Olenna watched her go, reflecting privately on the fragility of any pact in Westeros, however necessary it might be. True to her word, Catelyn left the capital 2 days later. She and Sansa departed in a modest caravan escorted by Northern and Riverlands knights. They slipped through the city gates at dawn to avoid crowds, traveling north along the King's Road. Sansa gazed back at the city's spires, half in relief, half in residual terror, before turning her gaze resolutely forward. She felt lighter once the walls receded and the farmland opened up around them. Their journey stretched over many days, the roads dusted by the late summer dryness. Word of the new order in King's Landing traveled faster than they did, so they often encountered small folk who already knew that the boy king was in chains and that a council would soon determine the next ruler. Along the way, they heard rumors. Some said the Lannisters were amassing an army to storm the capital. Others insisted Tywin Lannister was content to nurse his wounded pride at Casterly Rock. Still others whispered of Stannis Baratheon, who might sail from Dragonstone to claim his birthright. Catelyn remained stoic, focusing on reuniting with her remaining children. Sansa passed the time in silence, or spoke softly of Winterfell, the old gates, the Godswood. The memory of Joffrey lingered like a bruise. She wanted nothing more than to see the towers of Winterfell in the distance and smell the pines on the breeze. At the edge of the Riverlands, near the inn at the crossroads, they met a company of Northmen who had parted ways from Robb's main host to secure the route. The officer in charge recognized Lady Catelyn immediately, saluted, and explained that Robb had indeed gone farther north, pressing to retake full control of the Neck. Some said he intended to cross into the heart of the north and deal with the lingering threat of the Ironborn around Moat Cailin. "He left word for you, my lady," the officer said, dismounting to hand her a scroll bearing the dire wolf seal. Catelyn read it by torchlight in the yard that evening. "Mother, I pray the gods watch over you and Sansa on the road. The Northern Lords rally once more, for it is time to reclaim all that we lost to the Greyjoys and quell any who threaten our homes. I will be at Moat Cailin with the main host. Please join me there if safe. Otherwise, go directly to Winterfell. We will celebrate our reunion soon. Robb. Catelyn pressed the parchment to her heart, relief warring with worry. Moat Cailin was a grim fortress, but it controlled the main passage into the north. If the Ironborn still held it, the road home would be blocked or contested. She resolved to press on without delay, for Sansa's sake and for her own. In King's Landing, the date of the Great Council crept closer. Lords and retainers began to trickle in from across the realm, crowding inns and filling the mansions of absent or fallen nobility. The streets bustled, though the edges of the city remained scarred by months of previous unrest. Refugees from the surrounding crownlands camped outside the walls, hoping for a morsel of Tyrell-sponsored bread. Olenna Tyrell ordered extra patrols and insisted that any visiting lord or lady be escorted to the Red Keep with proper ceremony. She recognized that one ill-timed murder could unravel everything. Marjorie worked closely with the City Watch's new commander, ensuring that each arrival was greeted warmly, provided lodging in the keep or a suitable manse if available. It was a delicate dance of courtesy and quiet intimidation, for none were allowed to forget that the Tyrells held the city firmly. The Vale sent a small delegation. Lord Nestor Royce arrived, though Lady Lisa Arryn herself did not come, citing her health and the danger of travel. A cluster of knights and minor lords represented the Stormlands, each proclaiming conflicting loyalties, some to Stannis, some uncertain. From Dorne came a slender retinue bearing the Sun and Spear banner, though Prince Doran Martell remained in Sunspear. His brother, Oberyn Martell, was rumored to be away in Essos, so the delegation was led by a cousin of the Martell line. They carried themselves with a simmering anger, reminding any who would listen that the Martells still demanded justice for Elia and her children, murdered years ago by Lannister bannermen. The Tyrells welcomed each group with practiced politeness. Quiet tension layered every greeting, for the assembled lords had come to decide who should wear the crown, or if the monarchy would endure in its present shape at all. The official opening of the Great Council was scheduled for the following fortnight, giving time for stragglers to arrive. In the days leading up to it, the Red Keep's halls once more hummed with the chaos of feasts, rumors, and alliances. Men whispered about Stannis's rightful claim as Robert's eldest brother. Others pointed out that Tommen or Myrcella, though born of incest, might be more malleable and less monstrous than Joffrey. Still others murmured the old name Targaryen, referencing rumors of Daenerys Stormborn across the Narrow Sea. A few even suggested the Seven Kingdoms might splinter into multiple independent realms: North, Reach, Westerlands, Dorne, and so on. No single outcome seemed certain. Amid this tumult, Tyrion Lannister found himself in a peculiar position. He remained under guard, a guest prisoner in the Red Keep's labyrinth of corridors. Yet daily, he was invited to aid with finances and city administration. Guards trailed him whenever he left his designated chambers, but he had more freedom than his siblings, who remained locked away. One afternoon, as he emerged from a meeting with a group of Crownlands merchants, he passed by a corridor that led to the dungeons. On impulse, he glanced around, then quietly directed one of his guards, a man wearing the Tyrell rose on his surcoat, to let him pay a visit. "Merely to inquire after my brother's health," Tyrion said lightly. The guard frowned, but an order from Lady Olenna had noted that Tyrion could move about within reason, so long as he caused no trouble. With a shrug, the man led Tyrion down torchlit stairs. They reached a solid wooden door manned by two more guards, who looked up with suspicion. "I'd like to speak with Ser Jaime," Tyrion said. "We're family, after all." The guards glanced at each other. One sent a runner to confirm. A short time later, word came back that Lady Olenna permitted it. So they unbarred the door, revealing a dim passage with cells on either side. Torchlight flickered on dank stone walls. The dryness in Tyrion's mouth surprised him. For all his cynicism, he had never imagined the day he'd see Jaime caged like a common criminal. Jaime's cell was no ordinary filth-ridden pit. He was housed in a small chamber with a cot and a table, far from the worst the Red Keep could offer. Even so, the heavy iron bars across the entry reminded all that he was not free. He sat on the edge of the cot, wearing a plain tunic and breeches. His golden hair had grown ragged, and faint circles underscored his eyes. He glanced up sharply at the sound of footsteps, then froze. "Tyrion," he said, voice low with a mixture of relief and bitterness. Tyrion's guard stood watch in the corridor, so Tyrion approached the bars alone. He forced a small smile. "They say your accommodations are an improvement on the black cells. You should see what they do to ordinary criminals." Jaime huffed. "It's better than a dungeon in Harrenhal, but not by much." He stood and approached the bars. "What do you want?" Tyrion leaned on his staff, for he had taken to carrying a carved walking stick after a leg injury earlier in the war. "To see my brother, and to warn you, these Tyrells may treat you decently on the surface, but you're still a prized hostage, no more. Father is at Casterly Rock, presumably fuming. I suspect he's preparing something." Jaime pressed his lips together. "If he is, we've had no word of it down here. Cersei is seething, if you can believe it. She rails at the guards, demanding release, threatening. They ignore her." Tyrion sighed. An entirely predictable reaction. As for Joffrey, the less said, the better. He's in a separate tower, raving about how he'll flay every traitor alive. They keep him drugged on milk of the poppy to stop him from harming himself or the guards. Jaime closed his eyes briefly. 7 hells. A silence fell, thick with the knowledge of how thoroughly undone their family had become. Finally, Tyrion cleared his throat. "You know, once this great council convenes, our father might attempt to send emissaries to argue Joffrey's legitimate claim, or to propose Tommen or Myrcella. He might try to bribe half the realm into supporting us." Jaime grimaced. "So we remain pawns in the game, waiting for rescue or negotiation. I'm not sure which is worse." Tyrion's voice dropped lower. "If father can't sway the council, and the realm condemns Joffrey, it's possible they'll sentence him to die. And with him, if they push for justice, well, your role in the wars might be considered. My role, Cersei's role, could end badly." Jaime stared at his brother's mismatched eyes. "We used to be the proud lions. Now we're caged beasts in some twisted menagerie. Tyrion, if father fails, do you think the Tyrells will have us all executed?" Tyrion shrugged helplessly. "Olenna Tyrell is cunning, not bloodthirsty. She might keep us alive as leverage, or for fear that killing us would provoke unstoppable vengeance from father's remaining forces. With House Lannister in the west, controlling the gold mines, we remain too valuable to simply put to death. But the realm is a tinderbox. All it takes is one spark." Jaime's jaw flexed. He turned away, hands clenched at his sides, as though warring with regret and anger. "I should have left earlier, or forced Cersei to see reason. 7 above, I can't do anything from a cell." Tyrion's expression softened in genuine sympathy for his brother. "I'll do what I can. I'll speak for you, if the day comes that your fate is decided. You didn't murder Ned Stark or torment the city the way Joffrey did. Father's orchestrations aside, you have fewer crimes to answer for than some. If that helps." Jaime let out a breath. "I appreciate it, brother." They stood in silence until Tyrion realized his guard was growing impatient. "I'll visit again if they allow. Until then, try not to antagonize your jailers too much." Jaime gave a ghost of a smirk. "I'll do my best." Tyrion rapped on the bars lightly in farewell, then turned and left, the guard locking the cell door behind him. His thoughts churned as he climbed the damp stairs to the corridor above. The Lannisters might still be the second richest house in Westeros, behind only the Tyrells by some reckonings. But for all their gold, for all their once mighty name, they had been brought low by cunning and alliances. And Tyrion, half prisoner, half counselor, strode back into the labyrinth of a castle that no longer belonged to the lions at all. At Moat Cailin, that ancient ruin guarding the Neck, Robb Stark surveyed the battlements that had fallen to Ironborn raiders months past. A brutal fight had ended only hours before, with many of the Ironborn lying dead in the muddy causeways around the fortress. The Northmen had reclaimed the site, though not without cost. Robb had lost 20 men in the final assault, and more were wounded. Now he paced the deserted yard, gray wind trotting beside him, sniffing at the rubble. His personal guards picked through the bodies, searching for survivors or valuables. The Ironborn had been led by a lesser captain under House Botley, not even a blooded lord, but they had fought savagely. In the end, they could not stand against the combined weight of northern outriders and the men from the Riverlands who marched in Robb's host. As he examined the battered gatehouse, Roose Bolton approached, slow and measured, wearing a practical brigandine spattered with mud. "The fortress is ours again, your grace," Bolton said quietly. "We have a few reavers in chains, but the rest fell. What shall we do with the prisoners?" Robb removed his gauntlets, rubbing a hand over his face. He was exhausted. "The Ironborn came as invaders. I will not kill them in cold blood yet. We'll hold them until I can decide if they're worth ransoming. Perhaps that will make the Pike Lords think twice." Bolton's pale eyes flicked across the yard. "As you will. You've proven you can show mercy or wrath as needed." Robb frowned. "Any word from the scouts about Theon Greyjoy?" Bolton shook his head. "None. He vanished from Winterfell months ago. The trail grows cold. The castle itself was sacked and burned, if the reports are true. Yet your brothers may still live, the small folk say." Robb's chest tightened at the mention of his younger brothers, Bran and Rickon. The thought of Winterfell in ruins weighed on him more heavily than any crown. "We press on," he murmured. "If Theon is out there, I want him found. We'll see that justice is done." They fell silent. Robb climbed a half-collapsed staircase to the upper battlements, stepping carefully around loose stones. From this vantage, he peered out at the swamplands of the neck. The air reeked of damp earth and rotting vegetation. Once, Moat Cailin had been a near-impenetrable defense, protecting the north from southern armies. Now it lay half in ruin, the towers crumbling from centuries of neglect. He heard another set of footsteps and turned to see Lady Catelyn, her cloak spattered with mud from the roads. Behind her, Sansa hovered, looking wan in the harsh northern light. Robb felt a wave of relief so powerful he nearly staggered. "Mother," he said, striding forward to embrace her. Catelyn's eyes shone with tears as she folded him in her arms. "My boy," she whispered, her voice tight. "Thank the gods you're safe." Sansa stood slightly apart, unsure, until Robb turned to her. "Sansa," he murmured, noting how much she'd grown since he last saw her. She wore a traveler's gown and a look of fragile hope. "You're home, or nearly so. I'm sorry you had to witness this place in such a state." She swallowed, tears gathering. "I'm just glad to be with family. It's been so long, Robb." Robb rested a hand on her shoulder, pulling her into a gentle hug. "We'll see you safe at Winterfell. I only wish it was as we left it, but we'll rebuild." Catelyn eyed the battered fortress. "The Ironborn were here?" Robb nodded grimly. "We just drove them out. Some remain at large in the north, but with Moat Cailin reclaimed, we'll seal off the route south. If Balon Greyjoy doesn't yield, we might have to strike Pike itself eventually." Sansa glanced around, unsettled by the smell of blood on the wind. "What of Theon? He was raised at Winterfell, even if he's Balon's son." Robb's gaze hardened. "I owe Theon a reckoning for betraying our house, but we'll speak of that another time. For now, let's rest, gather what provisions we can, and press on. If Winterfell truly fell to his men, I need to see it with my own eyes." They walked back through the courtyard, picking their way around the fallen. Gray wind followed closely, ears perked at the tension in his master. Catelyn cast a glance at Roose Bolton, who lingered, watching them depart. She gave him a polite nod, trying not to show the discomfort his presence stirred. Within hours, they prepared to travel again, leaving a garrison at Moat Cailin to defend the gateway into the north. The bulk of Robb's host, thinned by months of battle, followed, weary but resolute, determined to secure their homeland from any lingering Ironborn. Though they carried the memory of King's Landing as a swift, near-bloodless victory, the same could not be said here. In the north, violence had run red and raw. In King's Landing, the final days before the Great Council brought a wave of arrivals. The courtyard of the Red Keep became a daily spectacle as knights and highborn lords paraded in, some with retinues of a dozen, others with hundreds. Tents sprouted outside the city walls for those who could not afford a room or found no lodging within. Gossip flew through taverns and wine sinks. The entire city seemed poised on the edge of a grand display of politics, and perhaps a renewed outbreak of violence if the negotiations went poorly. Olenna Tyrell managed the swirling chaos with her customary blend of sarcasm and iron will. She forced each arriving lord to register his presence, sending Marjorie or Garth Bannister to smooth ruffled feathers if needed. The main hall was prepared to host the sessions, with additional seats for the many lords and their advisors. The Iron Throne loomed at the far end, that twisted mass of melted swords, a silent reminder of the realm's fractious past. At midday on the appointed date, a hush fell over the Red Keep's corridors. The Great Council was to be convened in the throne room, with as many lords as possible in attendance. Small folk were barred from entry, but they gathered in squares outside, hoping for a glimpse or a rumor. Soldiers guarded every gate. Olenna arrived early, assisted by 2 pages. She took a seat near the front, ironically just below the Iron Throne steps, though she made no move to ascend it. Marjorie sat beside her. The dais was flanked by Tyrell men-at-arms and a handful of northern soldiers, a reminder that this was the new seat of power. Row by row, lords and their retinues filled the hall. The Martell contingent stood apart from the rest, wearing sullen expressions, speaking in low voices among themselves. The Vale's small retinue claimed seats near the perimeter, while a scattering of Stormland's knights took positions on the opposite side. The Crownland's banner holders, lacking a rightful occupant of the throne, seemed awkwardly placed, unsure to whom they owed fealty. Soon, the entire floor of the throne room was packed with mail-clad knights, lords in finery, maesters with their chains, and even a scattering of septons. Tyrion Lannister stood off to the side under careful guard, a chain of office around his neck that denoted his ongoing role with finances. His face was impassive. Farther back, Jaime and Cersei Lannister entered under escort. Murmurs rippled through the crowd at the sight of them. Cersei looked pale and furious, her hands bound loosely at her front. Jaime strode stiffly, casting glares at any who dared smirk at his plight. And Joffrey was conspicuously absent, still locked away, likely to be brought in at the last moment if called to speak. When everyone was gathered, Olenna Tyrell rose, tapping her cane once on the floor. The hall quieted, 1,000 eyes fixated on this small, sharp-eyed woman who now held the seat of power in King's Landing. "Lords of Westeros," she began, her voice ringing with surprising authority. "We gather to determine who shall rule the realm. King's Landing was taken without a city-wide slaughter, but the threat of war remains. We have in our custody King Joffrey, so-called, and many others of House Lannister who ruled through the might of the Iron Throne. Yet questions abound. Was Joffrey the rightful heir of Robert Baratheon? If not, who is? Does another have a stronger claim by law or blood? Or does the realm prefer a different shape altogether?" A murmur rose in the room, quickly stilled. Olenna nodded. "Let each man who claims knowledge or has a candidate step forward. But know this, the Tyrells and our allies will not allow a second war to tear the city apart. Our guards stand ready to quell violence. We shall attempt to settle this by reason." An older Stormlands lord stepped forward, clearing his throat. "My lady, the rightful heir is Stannis Baratheon, by all the laws of inheritance. Joffrey and his siblings are." He gave a pointed glare towards Cersei and Jaime. "Rumored to be born of incest, so they have no place in the line of succession. I speak for many who still hold faith in King Stannis." A second voice broke in from the Crownland side. "King Stannis refused to protect the city from the northern invasion. Where was he when Tywin's men were pinned by Robb Stark? No, I say we seat Tommen or Myrcella. They are younger, yes, but at least they bear the Baratheon name. That provoked a surge of angry whispers. Someone shouted, "They have Lannister blood, so they're no better than Joffrey." A Dornish lord stepped forward next, ignoring the outburst. "We of Dorne have not forgotten the horrors done to Princess Elia and her children. Yet we do not come to place a martel upon the throne, only to demand justice. If the realm crowns another child of House Lannister, we require surety that our grievances will be answered. If they seat Stannis, we likewise demand certain rights and restitution for the murders. We will not be silent." More shouted retorts erupted. Men jostled one another. Olenna rapped her cane on the floor again, summoning a hush. Marjorie cast her gaze around the hall, poised and attentive, as though memorizing every reaction. At that moment, the Vale's representative, Lord Nestor Royce, spoke in a somber tone. "The Eyrie remains uncertain. Lady Lisa Arryn does not acknowledge Stannis or Joffrey, nor do we speak for the Lannisters. We only say that the Vale wishes peace and security. We will observe the claims." Before he could finish, a Stormlands knight spat, "You can't hide forever in those mountains." Chaos threatened to break again, but was quelled by Olenna's pointed glare. She let the tension sit for a moment, then shifted her stance. "Some of you speak of Stannis Baratheon, some of Tommen or Myrcella, some demand justice. As for another rumored claimant, Daenerys Targaryen, far across the sea, she is not here to press her suit. Nor is there any word that she has the means to take the throne just now. That leaves an open question. Who shall speak in favor of crowning a Lannister or discarding the entire Baratheon line?" An uneasy hush followed. Few dared champion House Lannister openly with Tywin absent and the city under Tyrell control. Tyrion Lannister seemed to be the only one who might, and he was a prisoner. He remained silent, arms folded. Jaime ground his teeth, but likewise spoke not. From the back of the hall came a voice as smooth as oil, startling many who had not seen him enter. "My lady," said Peter Baelish, slipping through the crowd with practiced ease. "I come bearing tidings from your loyal subject, Lord Tywin Lannister, and if I might speak for the potential claim of Tommen Baratheon." Murmurs rippled through the assembly at his sudden appearance. Olenna's eyes narrowed. "Ah, you slithered back, Lord Baelish. We wondered when you'd re-emerge." Peter bowed with elaborate courtesy. "Forgive my tardiness. My travels abroad were urgent. I bring a letter from Lord Tywin, promising peaceful cooperation if Tommen is placed on the throne, with Tywin as regent until the boy comes of age. In exchange, House Lannister would withdraw any claim of vengeance for King's Landing." The hall erupted in heated exclamations. Men from the Stormlands called Baelish a traitor for endorsing a Lannister child. The Dornish scowled, hurling demands for retribution. Through it all, Peter maintained a slick, confident smile, as though he thrived on the chaos. Marjorie stood, her voice calm but carrying. "Lord Baelish, the city is under Tyrell care. A Lannister child on the throne would not erase the crimes committed by Joffrey or absolve the West of responsibility for the war." Baelish's eyes flicked to Marjorie. "Of course not, my lady, but it might avert further bloodshed. You see, many lords have no desire to bend the knee to Stannis, and fewer still believe in the Targaryen line. A child king, malleable and guided by wise counsel, could soothe the realm's wounds." Cersei, standing near the dais in manacles, gave a bitter laugh. "The realm's wounds, indeed. As if you'd do anything but line your pockets, Baelish." He ignored her barb, continuing to address Olenna and Marjorie. "Alternatively, you might propose another candidate entirely. But until you do, Tommen remains the simplest choice. The boy is innocent of Joffrey's sins. He never raised a sword or commanded cruelty." Olenna tapped her cane slowly, eyes flicking around the hall. "An innocent puppet, yes, with Tywin Lannister pulling the strings from Casterly Rock. That might not sit well with the rest of the realm." At this, a Stormlands lord stepped forward again, fists clenched. "We prefer Stannis, as the rightful heir by law." A wave of shouting ensued, stoked by Baelish's presence. In the midst of the din, Marjorie leaned over to speak quietly in her grandmother's ear. Olenna nodded. She raised her cane once more, but this time with a decisive gesture. "Silence," she commanded, voice sharp. The bickering subsided. "We cannot decide the fate of the throne through screaming. Let each major faction present its claim in turn. Those for Stannis, those for Tommen or Myrcella, those with other ideas. Then we shall debate. But if swords are drawn in this hall, the Tyrell guard will kill the offenders without hesitation." An uneasy hush followed. Lords who had come prepared to shout one another down realized they might have to speak in a calm, reasoned manner for once. Peter Baelish stepped back, bowing obsequiously. "Wise indeed, my lady. I await the chance to speak Tommen's case." Olenna motioned for her scribe. "We'll hear from the Stormlands next, then we'll proceed across the realm. We'll do this in some semblance of order or not at all. Those who disrupt will be removed." "Understood." Nods and murmurs of assent rippled through the crowd. And so the Great Council began in earnest. Over the following hours, representatives took turns proclaiming why they believed Stannis should rule, or why a child of Cersei's might still claim legitimacy, or why the realm might be better off splintered. The Dornish lords hammered on the need for Lannister accountability before any new monarchy was recognized. The Vale men repeated Lady Lysa's neutrality, though they hinted they might align with whichever faction promised the Vale certain privileges. All the while, Olenna listened, face unmoved, taking occasional notes or consulting with Marjorie and Garth Bannister. Outside the hall, a hush had descended over the city's squares, as people waited for news. Tyrion listened to the arguments, a deep wariness settling over him. He saw Peter Baelish's cunning at play. Set forth a child king to unify the realm, with Tywin or perhaps Baelish himself as regent. It might even work if the Tyrells were lulled or bribed, if the Martells could be quieted with gold or the heads of certain men, if the North, content with independence, withdrew entirely. So many ifs. He glanced at Jaime, who stood with arms bound, scowling, then at Cersei, whose face was twisted with hatred. Joffrey was the absent piece of this puzzle. If the realm formally condemned him, it would pave the way for Tommen. The question was whether the Tyrells would ever allow another Lannister to sit the throne. As the session wore on and the torches along the walls burned low, voices grew strained. The Stormlands men clashed verbally with the Crownlands loyalists. The Dornish muttered about the crimes of House Lannister, and the Vale declared they might side with no one unless their conditions were met. Through it all, Peter Baelish glided about, whispering in ears, sowing confusion or bargains. When the final argument of the evening concluded, Olenna stood once more. "Enough for tonight. We shall reconvene on the morrow. Sleep on these questions, my lords. The realm depends on your reason." Exhausted and tense, the Great Council broke for the night. Lords shuffled out, some to their manors, others to the keep's guest chambers. Peter Baelish vanished almost immediately, off to weave his threads. Tyrion returned to his guarded chambers, mind churning with every possible outcome. Cersei and Jaime were escorted away under watchful eyes. The Dornish men lingered to speak with Marjorie about a potential arrangement. Amid the swirl of departures, Olenna sank into her seat, massaging her temples. Marjorie poured her a cup of watered wine. "That was only the first day, grandmother," Marjorie said quietly. "We haven't even gotten to whether the North will declare independence." Olenna sipped the wine, narrowing her eyes at the flickering torches. "Yes, the North, the Starks. I do wonder how many lords realize that the king in the North has little interest in any southern throne. He'd as soon let the Southerners tear each other apart, so long as the North is left in peace. We need to ensure their voice is heard, though. Without the North's acceptance, any new king might inherit a realm half-riven." Marjorie nodded. "Robb Stark's envoys said he would send a representative, but they've not yet arrived." Olenna stared into her cup. "We must tread carefully. The game is not yet won, child, and men like Baelish thrive on turning chaos into their advantage. We'll see how tomorrow fares." She stood, leaning on her cane, and let Marjorie guide her from the hall. Outside, The corridors felt ominously still, as though waiting for a single spark to ignite. The question of the Iron Throne remained unsolved. Joffrey was as good as dethroned, but which name would replace his? And would the realm accept the verdict? No one had the answers yet, but all knew that if they failed to reach a settlement, the war that they had so carefully avoided in King's Landing might merely have been delayed. In the north, Robb Stark stood at the gates of Winterfell at last, with Sansa and Catelyn at his side. The castle walls loomed blackened and broken in places. Smoke stains marred the once proud towers, but it was quiet now, no sign of Ironborn or other invaders. A hush hung over the courtyard, where only a scattering of folk emerged to see who arrived. Robb felt his throat constrict. He'd grown up playing in these yards, chasing his siblings with wooden swords, listening to his father's firm lessons. Now the place bore scars of betrayal. Sansa pressed close, eyes brimming with tears at the sight. Catelyn gazed in silent sorrow, her lips parted in an unvoiced lament for what had been lost. As they entered the courtyard, a handful of house guards rushed forward, men loyal to the Starks who had survived the Ironborn occupation. One recognized them immediately, falling to his knees. "My lord, my lady, the gods be praised, you've come." Robb dismounted, pulling the man to his feet. "Who holds Winterfell now?" "No one, my lord. The Ironborn fled or were driven out by unknown forces weeks ago." Catelyn frowned. "Unknown forces?" The guard looked uneasy. "There were rumors of a band of... well, we're not certain. Some said it was Bolton men. Others said it was a small group led by one of your bannermen. They left the castle in ruins, though. We found signs of a battle, but no living foes." Robb's stomach nodded. He remembered that Bolton had once implied he'd send men to reclaim the castle. But if that were so, why did they leave it so badly burned? He glanced at Sansa, who pressed her lips together in dread. The guard went on, voice hoarse. "We searched the crypts for your brothers, but found no sign. We can only hope they escaped." Robb's control slipped for a heartbeat, sorrow and anger washing through him. He closed his eyes, inhaled. Then, steeling himself, he gave a curt nod. "We'll search again. For now, re-raise the Stark banners. Winterfell stands, battered but ours. We must restore what we can." The man bowed. "At once, my lord," as they entered the great hall. Its roof scorched, tapestries damaged. Sansa clung to their mother's arm. Catelyn lifted her chin, setting aside her own grief to comfort her daughter. "We'll rebuild," she said softly. "We are Starks, and this is our home." Robb laid a hand on the soot-stained stone of a column. Memories flooded him. Ned Stark's voice, a father's warmth. He recalled the direwolf pups, the squeals of Rickon chasing them, Bran climbing towers he shouldn't. A cold rage smoldered beneath his pain. Theon Greyjoy had done this, betrayed them, or others had taken advantage. Either way, the burden of ruling the North and exacting justice fell to Robb now. He turned to his mother and sister. "We'll begin repairs immediately. We'll send out search parties for Bran and Rickon across the countryside. And we'll find the truth of who burned Winterfell. I promise you both." Catelyn reached for his hand, and Sansa gently placed hers atop both. In that moment, they were three members of a fractured family, holding each other up against the storm. They had wrested King's Landing from the Lannisters by cunning, forging a path to victory that spared countless lives. Yet here in the north, the scars of the war remained more visible, more raw. And Robb Stark realized, with a twist of bitter irony, that while the South might scramble over crowns and councils, his duty lay amid these burnt stones and broken towers, ensuring that House Stark rose again, stronger if the gods were kind. A new wind rattled the charred rafters overhead, as though the old gods themselves were breathing a warning. The war for the Iron Throne was not done, only transformed. In the quiet hush of Winterfell's wreckage, Robb understood that what he and Lady Olenna Tyrell had begun in King's Landing would have consequences rippling through every corner of the realm. Perhaps they had bought a chance for peace by capturing the city with diplomacy. But peace in Westeros was as fragile as a crow's egg in a storm. He took a final glance at his mother and sister. They were alive, that was all that truly mattered in this moment. He squared his shoulders, setting his jaw. One step at a time. Rebuild Winterfell. Protect the North. Honor the alliance with House Tyrell. And if need be, stand ready to face Tywin Lannister's vengeance, or any other threat that tried to tear down what they had saved. In the days that followed, the Great Council in King's Landing wrestled with the realm's future. Declaring Joffrey illegitimate proved easy enough. Evidence of incest was widespread, from Ned Stark's research to the testimonies of city folk who had known Robert Baratheon. The real trouble lay in who or what would replace him. Some factions championed Stannis. Others, led by Baelish, urged crowning Tommen, with the promise of Tywin's gold to heal the realm. The Dornish refused to support any Lannister scion until they received a binding agreement of reparation. The Vale threatened neutrality if forced to choose between Lannister gold and the inflexible Stannis. The Stormlands delegation bickered among themselves, half followed Stannis, the other half eyed the possibility of forging ties with the Tyrells. Olenna Tyrell listened intently, rarely revealing her own preference. She recognized that installing Tommen might keep the peace in the short run, except it would restore a Lannister line to the throne. But supporting Stannis meant dealing with a man whose sense of righteousness could become a brand of tyranny. Meanwhile, talk of a Targaryen restoration lingered in the shadows, though no official envoy had arrived from across the narrow sea to press Daenerys's claim. Each day, the council members gathered to argue, only to disperse in frustration. Tension mounted. The city felt as though it sat on a tinderbox, awaiting a single spark. Eventually, Marjorie approached her grandmother in private, eyes troubled. "Grandmother, the council goes in circles. We must propose something or risk losing the advantage. Lord Baelish is charming half the hall with promises of Lannister coin." Olenna pursed her lips. "I know, but if we give Tommen the crown, we risk letting Tywin slip back in the front door. If we back Stannis, who's to say he won't turn on us the moment he's enthroned, claiming old grudges from the Battle of the Blackwater and beyond? Or impose his harsh justice on the Tyrells for supporting Renly?" Marjorie's features tightened. "We cannot appease everyone. Perhaps we can propose a regency council, an interim rule while the realm recovers, and leave the crown vacant for now." Olenna blinked. It was not a common approach, but the realm had known variants of regency. A vacant throne? You think the lords will accept that? Marjorie exhaled. "If we promise that no single house will grab absolute power, we might placate the Vale and Dorne, and even the Stormlands. The question is who sits on that regency council, and for how long?" Olenna considered. "A bold notion, child. But if we propose that, we must be prepared for immediate backlash from those who crave a king. Men of Westeros are used to a single monarch, not a council. Still, perhaps it's enough of a compromise to keep us from more bloodshed." They spoke late into the night, hammering out details. In the end, Olenna agreed to float the idea. Better to set forth an alternative than watch the council tear itself apart. The next day, with the throne room near to bursting from the assembled lords, Olenna rose. When she announced the proposition, a regency with no immediate king, an uproar ensued. Some jeered that it was unnatural, a sure path to anarchy. Others stroked their beards thoughtfully, seeing a chance to gain a seat on such a council. Peter Baelish cunningly asked whether House Tyrell meant to rule alone until a king was chosen. Olenna fixed him with a sharp glare. "I propose a regency of lords from each major region, Crownlands, Reach, Westerlands, North, Stormlands, Vale, and Dorne, each with a vote. The Iron Throne remains symbolically the seat of power, but empty until we settle the matter of rightful blood or a new line." She let the hall erupt in debate again. Marjorie stood by her side, fielding questions. The Dornish insisted on restitution. The Stormlands insisted on a place for Stannis or a vow that he would be invited to present his claim. The Vale demanded tribute for staying out of the war thus far. All the while, Baelish took notes, smiling faintly as though this chaos suited him well. Tyrion observed from afar, considering how easily the realm might slip from Lannister hands forever. Tommen and Myrcella's names still floated about, but with Joffrey discredited, The stigma was nearly impossible to shake without Tywin's formidable presence in person. At last, after hours of wrangling, it seemed that half the Great Council leaned toward trying this unusual compromise. They reasoned that it was better than anointing a single claimant and sparking another open war. Thus, a shaky agreement formed. The Iron Throne would remain unoccupied for a time. A council of 7 delegates, one from each region, would govern. Olenna Tyrell, by near-unanimous agreement, would continue as the caretaker of King's Landing, ensuring the city's bread and defenses remained stable. An official invite would go out to Stannis Baratheon, urging him to present his claim peacefully. House Lannister would also be invited to propose Tommen or Myrcella, though no guarantee was given they would be accepted. The Dornish, for their part, demanded that the guilt for the murder of Elia be laid at those who had done the deed, namely, the late Gregor Clegane, and that certain financial reparations be made to House Martell. The session concluded amid a swirl of relief, skepticism, and exhaustion. Outside, King's Landing's people heard that no new king had been named, but also that the city would not fall into bloodshed. For many, that was enough. One day later, when the Great Council reconvened to confirm this regency arrangement, Peter Baelish stood forth with an enigmatic smile. "If it please the assembled lords, I bring word from Lord Tywin Lannister. He asks that we name him as the representative for the Westerlands, as is his right as Warden of the West. In that capacity, he will accept the Council's authority while still promoting young Tommen's claim if the realm ever chooses a single king." Surprised mutters rippled through the hall. Many expected Tywin to ride at the head of an army to tear down the Tyrells, not to accept a compromise. Clearly, the old lion had chosen a more strategic path. Olenna narrowed her eyes. "And how does he propose we handle the matter of Joffrey, or the crimes laid at House Lannister's feet?" Baelish bowed slightly. "Lord Tywin acknowledges that if Joffrey is found guilty of usurpation, the realm's justice may be served as the council sees fit. He does not openly dispute the incest rumors, though I'm sure he would call them malicious falsehoods. He regrets the damage wrought during the war. In short, my lady, he wants a seat at the table more than he wants to see the city in flames." A hush fell. Even the Dornish lords seemed momentarily impressed by Tywin's unexpected willingness to join a regency rather than wage immediate war. Tyrion watched with hooded eyes, suspecting his father had deduced that infiltration of this new council was the best route to reclaiming influence. Olenna lifted her cane. "Then let the Westerlands have their seat, though we will not release Joffrey or the other Lannisters until we are sure of Tywin's sincerity. They remain hostages, albeit comfortable ones, for the realm's security." Baelish inclined his head. "A matter for ongoing negotiation, I'm sure." Thus, the Regency Council found a seat for Tywin Lannister, albeit in absentia for the time being. The Martells grumbled, but recognized that preventing Tywin from having any voice might only provoke him. The Stormlands faction insisted on sending ravens to Stannis, urging him to claim his seat. The Vale nominated Lord Jon Royce as their delegate, since Lady Lisa refused to leave the Eyrie. The Crownlands, being too fragmented to choose a single voice, ended up deferring to Marjorie and her grandmother for local matters. By day's end, an uneasy pact was sealed. No crowned king ruled from the Iron Throne, but a council of 7 was named, with seats nominally reserved for each region. The City Watch and the Tyrell soldiers maintained order, while the rest of Westeros braced itself. Would this new government born of cunning, necessity, and compromise truly endure, or would ambition tear it apart from within? As the lords filtered out of the throne room, Tyrion remained, looking at the great seat of melted swords. It loomed above him, vacant, an artifact of Targaryen conquest that had defined the realm for centuries. He wondered if it might remain empty forever, a monument to past tyrannies. Before he could dwell too long, Olenna Tyrell approached, flanked by Garth Bannister and Marjorie. Tyrion inclined his head. "My lady," he said, "you've done something no one else has ever dared. Left the throne empty." Olenna's expression was enigmatic. "A measure to prevent further bloodshed if we're lucky. The realm can't abide another decade of warring claimants." Tyrion gave a faint nod. "And my father?" Do you truly trust him not to sow destruction? Olenna's mouth curved in the slightest of smiles. Trust? No, but better to have him in the tent under watch than outside with an army. We'll see how the old lion fares when forced to negotiate with the Martells, the Stormlands, the Vale, and eventually the North. Marjorie looked at Tyrion earnestly. Lord Tyrion, you stand to gain if your father's plan to enthrone Tommen ever comes to pass. Would you prefer that to this council? He considered carefully, searching her eyes. I prefer whatever keeps me breathing and the realm at peace. If Tommen could unify the realm without plunging us all back into war, I'd be content to see him crowned. But after all that's happened, I'd say we have a long road to travel before anyone kneels to a Lannister again. Olenna gave a curt nod. Well spoken. Now, if you'll excuse me, the day has been long, and I'm weary of all these squawking lords. Garth, see that the watch is doubled around the keep tonight. The tension in the city will be palpable. Garth bowed, and Olenna turned away, Marjorie following. Tyrion remained, gaze still drawn to the vacant throne, pondering the swirl of alliances that had brought them here. The capital was under Tyrell control, Joffrey locked away, Stannis far off at Dragonstone, Tywin looming in the west, and the north effectively seceded, led by a young king who wanted no part in the southern fray. Could this council truly hold the realm together? He did not know, but for the moment, no swords rang in the streets. The city's people ate bread, not corpses. And that, Tyrion Lannister reflected, was more than could have been said for any other regime in recent memory. Weeks bled into a new season. In the north, Robb Stark oversaw the slow rebuilding of Winterfell and the uncertain search for his missing brothers. Reports trickled in of fleeting sightings of 2 young boys, or the burned corpses of children in the countryside. Rumors mixed with hope and dread. Still, Robb pressed on, reinforcing his hold on the north, driving out or executing any remaining Ironborn raiders, and re-establishing alliances with houses that had lost faith after the castle's fall. In King's Landing, the Regency Council convened daily, with Peter Baelish, Tyrion Lannister, and other cunning minds maneuvering for leverage. Lady Olenna Tyrell kept her steely gaze on them all, ensuring that the capital's supplies flowed from the Reach, that the City Watch answered to Tyrell-appointed officers, and that no single lord dared spark fresh conflict. She remained the realm's de facto leader, while publicly claiming it was the council that ruled. Ravens flew across the sea to Dragonstone, inviting Stannis to present his claim. So far, no formal response arrived. Some said Stannis was biding his time or planning another approach, perhaps forging alliances with foreign sell-sales. Others whispered that the Lord of Dragonstone had lost heart after hearing how King's Landing had changed hands without a battle. Still other rumors spoke of Daenerys Targaryen in Essos, gathering support or hatching dragons, wild stories of mythical creatures. Few in King's Landing took it seriously. The realm had enough troubles without chasing fantasies across the narrow sea. In the west, Tywin Lannister slowly rebuilt his power base. Delegations from the council visited him, and though he received them with polite courtesy, he refused to travel to King's Landing in person. Yet, instead, he sent Kevan Lannister or Peter Baelish to speak on his behalf. The Westerlands closed ranks around their lord, returning to old allegiances, while Tywin quietly recruited new men for his armies. Across the narrow strait of the Blackwater, the Stormlands vacillated, half sworn to Stannis, half uncertain. Dorne smoldered in memory of old crimes, waiting to see if the Regency would fulfill promises of restitution. The Vale locked itself behind the Ares Heights, Lady Lisa refusing to let her young son descend to the wars. And so, the 7 kingdoms existed in an uneasy equilibrium. No one was wholly satisfied, yet few had the will or strength to break the peace. One might call it a fragile moment of hope, or the quiet before another storm. For Olenna Tyrell, sitting in the shade of Highgarden's old wards in her mind's eye, it was a testament to how cunning and a well-placed alliance could topple even the mightiest lions. For Robb Stark, busy reconsecrating Winterfell's godswood, it was a bittersweet victory that had cost him too much. For Cersei Lannister, pacing in her gilded cage, it was an intolerable humiliation that she swore to avenge. For Tyrion, It was a delicate dance on a razor's edge, where one misstep could end all. Yet even with the throne unoccupied, the realm might stand a chance to heal. The small folk of King's Landing, after so many hardships, found themselves fed and relatively safe. The ports bustled, trade routes reopened, and rumors spread that soon the council might even codify new laws to ensure no tyrant could seize the throne unopposed. Whether the day would come when a single monarch rose to reign was anyone's guess. But for the first time in a very long while, Westeros was not drowning in the flames of war. Instead, it hovered on the brink of something new, perhaps peace, perhaps more cunning manipulations. The seeds of conflict still slept in every corner, seeds that could sprout into fresh disaster if nurtured by pride or desperation. Yet for the moment, a rose had joined with a dire wolf, and the golden lion was caged. King's Landing breathed more freely, repaired its walls, and looked toward a future shaped not by the monstrous boy king but by a tenuous council of fractious lords. In the cold halls of Winterfell, Robb Stark prayed to the old gods for the safe return of his brothers, wishing the burdens of kingship would melt away like snows in spring. Some in taverns and noble parlors alike whispered that the cunning alliance between House Tyrell and House Stark had rewritten the rules. If such different powers could work together, might Westeros emerge stronger? Or would it instead fracture the realm irrevocably? Only time would tell. But at least the city did not burn, and the swords in the streets lay quiet. For once, diplomacy, swift planning, and a shared sense of necessity had triumphed over raw steel. It was a rare victory indeed, precarious, yes, but a victory all the same. And so, the realm turned, day by day, beneath the watch of the Seven and the old gods, poised between hope and the memory of war.